Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, where humanity clings to existence beneath the eternal vigilance of a dying god-emperor, where ancient Xenos races plot in the shadows and the forces of chaos hunger for mortal souls, there exists a threat that defies conventional understanding. This threat does not scheme in darkness like the Eldar, does not calculate with cold precision like the Tau, and certainly does not worship the ruinous powers like the servants of chaos. Instead, this threat embraces warfare with a joy so profound, so utterly genuine, that it becomes almost incomprehensible to those races who view war as necessity rather than celebration. The Orks represent something unique in the 41st millennium, a species for whom combat is not merely survival or conquest, but the very essence of existence itself. They are the green tide that crashes upon imperial worlds with the inevitability of ocean waves against ancient shores. They are the laughter in the darkness, the bellowing war cries that echo across burning battlefields, the crude humor in the face of annihilation. Where other races grow weary of endless war, the Orks thrive. Where civilizations crumble under the weight of perpetual conflict, Ork society grows stronger, more vibrant, more alive. To understand the strength of the Orks is to grapple with a fundamental paradox. They appear primitive, wielding weapons cobbled together from scrap metal and good intentions. Their technology looks like it should fall apart at the first jostle. Their tactics seem to consist primarily of charging headlong into enemy fire while screaming at the top of their considerable lungs. Yet these same apparently crude warriors have brought the Imperium of man to its knees multiple times throughout history. They have threatened Terra itself, the very heart of humanity's galactic domain. They have shattered Space Marine chapters, overwhelmed entire sectors, and turned thriving civilizations into smoking ruins. The question of Ork strength is not a simple one. It cannot be answered with statistics alone, though the numbers are staggering. It cannot be understood through their technology, though their weapons are far more sophisticated than they appear. To truly grasp how powerful the Orks are, we must journey into their biology, their psychology, their history, and their culture. We must understand not just what makes them strong, but why they are, in many ways, the most successful species in the entire galaxy. This is a story that spans millions of years, from the ancient war in heaven, when the Orks' ancestors fought alongside their creators against the soulless Necrons, to the present day, where they remain an eternal threat to every civilization that dares to exist within their reach. It is a story of biology engineered for war, of gestalt psychic phenomena that bends reality itself, of technology that functions through collective belief, and of a species that views the galaxy not as a place to conquer or colonize, but as an infinite playground for violence. The Orks outnumber humanity. Let that sink in for a moment. Humanity, spread across 1,000,000 worlds, counting its population in the countless trillions, is outnumbered by the green-skinned menace. They outnumber the Tau, the Eldar, possibly even the teeming swarms of Tyranids that pour into the galaxy from beyond its rim. If the Orks were ever to truly unite under a single banner, if their fractious tribes and clans were to set aside their differences and focus their collective might upon a single goal, they would quite possibly crush all opposition. The galaxy would turn green beneath their boots. But therein lies another paradox that defines Ork strength. They are simultaneously the most numerous and most divided species in known space. Their power is both their greatest asset and their fundamental limitation. They are too successful at being Orks, too enthusiastic about fighting, too eager to test themselves against any foe, including each other. This internal conflict, this constant warring between clans and tribes and war bosses, is perhaps the only thing that has prevented them from achieving total dominance. What follows is an exploration of Ork strength in all its violent, chaotic glory. We will peer into their bizarre biology that blends animal and fungus into something greater than either. We will examine the Gestalt psychic field that allows them to accomplish feats that defy rational explanation. We will walk through their history, from ancient days to the present, seeing how they have shaped and been shaped by the endless wars of the 41st millennium. We will meet their greatest leaders, understand their unique culture, and analyze how they compare to other factions in this universe of war. By the end, you will understand why the Orks are not merely strong, but perhaps the most perfectly adapted species for the galaxy they inhabit. In a universe where there is only war, the Orks have evolved, or been designed, or perhaps stumbled into becoming the ultimate warriors. Not because they are the most skilled or the best equipped, but because they alone among all the races truly love what they do. Ancient origins, the legacy of the Krork. To understand the strength of the Orks, we must travel back in time, far beyond the age of the Imperium, beyond even the dark age of technology, when humanity reached heights that would seem like magic to their degraded descendants. We must journey to an era that predates human civilization by millions of years, to a time when the galaxy was young, and the great powers that would shape its future were locked in a war of such magnitude that it threatened reality itself. This was the War in Heaven, a conflict between the ancient Necrontyre and their Satan allies against the Old Ones and their servant races. The Old Ones, beings of such advanced biology and psychic mastery that they seemed godlike even to other advanced species, found themselves pressed by enemies whose technology could reshape stars and whose immortal armies knew no fear. In their desperation, the Old Ones turned to their greatest talent, biological engineering. They had already created the Eldar, a psychically potent race designed to channel the energies of the warp itself. But the Eldar, for all their potential, were delicate beings, ill-suited for the grinding attritional warfare that the conflict had become. What the Old Ones needed was something different. They needed soldiers who could survive anything, who would throw themselves into battle without hesitation, who could be left on a world to fight and thrive without support or direction. They needed warriors who would never question, never despair, never surrender. They created the Krork. The Krork were not Orks, not yet. They were something greater, something more organized and more dangerous. Standing as tall as Imperial knights, possessing intelligence and strategic acumen that would shame most Imperial commanders, equipped with technology that combined biological engineering with advanced material science, the Krork were perhaps the Old Ones' masterwork in military biology. They were designed from the ground up as the perfect soldiers for an eternal war. Every aspect of Krork biology served a military purpose. Their green skin allowed them to photosynthesize, reducing the need for complex supply lines. Their hybrid animal-fungal nature meant they could reproduce through spores, turning every battlefield into a spawning ground for future warriors. Their simplified internal anatomy reduced the number of vital organs that enemies could target. Their instinctive understanding of technology meant they could maintain and repair their equipment without formal training. Most importantly, their Gestalt psychic field allowed them to accomplish feats that pure technology alone could never achieve. The Krork fought in the War in Heaven with a fury that impressed even the Old Ones. They battled the Necrons across countless worlds, their numbers swelling with each engagement, as spores from the fallen took root and grew into new warriors. They learned, they adapted, they thrived in conditions that would have broken lesser races. And when the War in Heaven finally ended, when the Satan were shattered, and the Necrons entered their long sleep, when the Old Ones themselves faded from history, the Krork remained. But without their creators to guide them, without the advanced technology and infrastructure that had supported them during the war, the Krork began to change. Or perhaps devolve is the better word. Generation by generation, the spore-born warriors grew simpler, more primitive. The towering, intelligent Krork gave way to smaller, cruder creatures. The sophisticated technology degraded into ramshackle constructions of salvaged parts and improvisation. The strategic brilliance faded into a more instinctive understanding of warfare. They became orcs. Yet even in this degraded state, even stripped of the heights their ancestors had achieved, the orcs remained formidable. The core of their design persisted through the millennia. They still reproduced through spores, still possessed their hybrid biology, still generated the gestalt psychic field that their creators had engineered into their very genes. The Krork might be gone, but their legacy lived on in every greenskin that emerged from the ground ready to fight. This ancient origin explains much about the orcs' strength. They were not created to colonize or to build civilizations. They were not designed to explore or to create art or to pursue knowledge for its own sake. Every aspect of their being, down to the cellular level, was optimized for a single purpose: warfare. They are not a species that happens to be good at fighting. They are a weapon that happens to be alive. Understanding this origin is crucial to grasping why the orcs are so difficult to eradicate. They were specifically engineered to persist in hostile environments without support. They were designed to turn every defeat into future reinforcements as their spores spread. They were created to thrive on conflict itself, growing stronger with each battle. The Old Ones built them to fight forever, and in that task at least, they succeeded beyond even their creators' wildest expectations. The tragedy, from the perspective of every other species in the galaxy, is that the orcs' devolution from Krork has not made them weaker in absolute terms. It has merely made them less organized, less coordinated. A Krork empire, with all the intelligence and technology of the ancient warriors, would have conquered the galaxy millennia ago, but modern orcs, fractious and brawling, spending as much energy fighting each other as their external enemies, have become a sustainable threat rather than an existential one. Sustainable, but no less deadly for that. The genetic legacy of the Krork ensures that orcs will always be formidable opponents. Their DNA carries encoded knowledge of warfare and technology, waiting to express itself as they grow and mature. An orc might emerge from the ground knowing nothing, but give him a pile of scrap and time, and he will build a weapon. Put him in a fight, and instinct will guide his movements. Gather enough orcs together, and their collective psychic field will begin to warp reality in subtle but significant ways. The Old Ones are long gone, vanished into history or extinction. The war in heaven is a memory preserved only in the most ancient of archives. But the soldiers they created to fight that war persist, and in their persistence, they have become one of the defining features of the 41st millennium. Every time an Imperial world is invaded by the Green Tide, every time a Space Marine chapter deploys to contain an Orc uprising, every time the Eldar manipulate events to redirect Orc forces away from their craft worlds, they are dealing with the echoes of a war fought millions of years before humanity even existed. The Orcs are living fossils, relics of an ancient age of war. But unlike the Necrons who sleep in their tombs, or the Eldar who fade slowly into extinction, the Orcs remain vibrantly, violently, joyously alive. They are the Old Ones' children, grown wild and rough without their parents' guidance, but still carrying within them the potential for greatness that their creators engineered into their very being. Biology of violence, the Orc physiology. The Orc body is a marvel of biological engineering, though one would never guess it from appearance alone. At first glance, an Orc seems almost comically crude. Green skin scarred and pockmarked with damage, massive muscles straining against a hunched frame, arms so long that knuckles nearly scrape the ground, tusks protruding from a brutish jaw. Yet this apparently primitive exterior conceals one of the most sophisticated biological designs in the galaxy. Let us begin with the most obvious feature, that distinctive green coloration that gives the greenskins their name. The Orc's skin is not merely pigmented green, it is fundamentally different from the flesh of other intelligent species. Analysis by Adeptus Mechanicus Magos. Biologus has revealed that Orc skin contains high concentrations of chlorophyll, the same chemical that allows plants to convert sunlight into energy. In essence, Orks can photosynthesize. This discovery has profound implications for understanding orc military effectiveness. Where other armies must maintain complex supply chains to feed their soldiers, orcs can supplement their nutrition through exposure to light. While they do eat, often voraciously, they can survive extended periods with minimal food as long as they have access to sunlight or even strong artificial light. This reduces one of the most significant logistical burdens of warfare, allowing orc forces to campaign in regions where other armies would starve. The photosynthetic capability is just one manifestation of the orc's unique biological structure. At the cellular level, orcs are not purely animal, not purely fungal, but a seamless integration of both kingdoms of life. Their animal cells provide mobility, sensation, and the raw power of musculature. Their fungal cells provide resilience, regeneration, and the mechanism for their unique reproductive cycle. These two types of cells work in perfect harmony, each compensating for the weaknesses of the other. Consider the orc's internal anatomy, where humans have kidneys, liver, spleen, and a host of other organs, each a potential point of failure. Orcs possess a greatly simplified internal structure. Many of the functions performed by complex organs in other species are handled by the fungal components of their physiology. This means there are fewer vital targets within an orc's body. A wound that would prove fatal to a human might merely inconvenience an orc. Their cardiovascular system pumps thick, green blood, rich with chlorophyll and containing countless fungal organisms. This blood carries not just oxygen, but also fungal spores that can rapidly mobilize to repair damaged tissue. When an orc is wounded, these spores congregate at the site of injury, forming a fungal matrix that serves as scaffolding for new tissue growth. Injuries that would require weeks or months of recovery for other species heal in days for an orc. The regenerative capabilities of orc physiology are legendary. Adeptus Mechanicus researchers have documented cases of orcs who were literally hacked to pieces, being stitched back together by their comrades and returning to combat within days, bewildered but functional. Short of complete incineration or the total destruction of the brain, there are few injuries that will permanently incapacitate an orc. Even beheading is not always fatal, as the combination of simplified internal structure and fungal regeneration can sometimes allow an orc to survive long enough for his head to be reattached. This resilience extends to their skeletal structure. An orc's skull is approximately 2 inches thick, more than twice the density of human bone. This provides extraordinary protection for the brain, allowing orcs to survive impacts that would shatter lesser skulls. Their other bones are similarly reinforced, giving them a frame that can support tremendous musculature while resisting breaks and fractures. And what musculature it is! An average orc stands approximately 7 feet tall when fully upright, though their natural hunched posture often makes them appear shorter. They weigh around 570 pounds, most of that weight consisting of dense, powerful muscle. An orc possesses the strength to lift 10 metric tons. Let me repeat that for emphasis. 10 metric tons. A single orc could lift a small vehicle over his head. This incredible strength is not merely a function of muscle mass. The orc muscular system operates at an efficiency that human muscles could never achieve. Each muscle fiber can generate more force per unit of mass, thanks to the integration of fungal elements that provide additional biochemical energy. When an orc exerts himself, his fungal components mobilize stored energy reserves, allowing bursts of strength that exceed what pure animal muscle could produce. The power of orc musculature is demonstrated every time one picks up a weapon. A bolt pistol, designed for space marines with their enhanced physiology, feels light in an orc's grip. A chain axe that would require a human to use 2 hands becomes a one-handed weapon. Orcs have been documented tearing armored doors off their hinges, crushing skulls between their fingers, and picking up fallen comrades in full armor to use as improvised clubs. Perhaps even more impressive than their baseline strength is their capacity for growth. Orcs do not mature like other species. They grow throughout their lives, and they grow faster when they fight regularly. An orc who wins battles consistently will become visibly larger and stronger over time. His muscles will swell, his bones will thicken, his very frame will expand. This growth is driven by a combination of factors: increased food intake from looting, enhanced biochemical activity from the adrenaline of combat, and possibly even psychic reinforcement from the respect and fear he generates among his fellows. The most successful orc war bosses can reach truly massive proportions. Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, the most powerful orc alive in the current era, stands as tall as an imperial dreadnought. The beast, leader of the largest orc invasion in recorded history, was described as being comparable in size to an imperial knight. These are not mutants or aberrations, but simply orcs who have fought and won so many battles that their bodies have responded with proportional growth. This growth mechanism explains much about orc society and their respect for size. The biggest orc is almost always the most experienced fighter, the one who has survived the most battles and claimed the most victories. Size becomes a visible marker of combat prowess, a billboard announcing to all other orcs that this is a warrior worth following or worth avoiding. It creates a natural hierarchy based on proven ability rather than claims or lineage. The orc respiratory system is another marvel of efficient design. They possess sponge-like fungal organs that supplement their lungs, increasing oxygen absorption while filtering out toxins that would poison other species. Orcs can survive in atmospheres that would kill humans within minutes. They can fight in environments choked with industrial pollutants, volcanic ash, or chemical weapons. Their fungal components simply filter out the harmful elements, while their photosynthetic skin continues generating energy. Temperature extremes that would incapacitate other warriors barely slow orcs down. Their hybrid physiology allows them to function across a wider temperature range than pure animals could manage. The fungal elements can enter a state of dormancy to conserve energy in extreme cold, while the animal components can continue functioning. In extreme heat, the photosynthetic skin actually becomes more efficient, generating additional energy that compensates for the stress of high temperatures. Even their senses are optimized for warfare. Orc eyesight is adequate but unremarkable in most respects, but they possess exceptional motion detection. A moving enemy will capture an orc's attention instantly, triggering predatory instincts encoded in their genes. Their hearing is acute enough to pick up the sound of approaching vehicles or the movement of enemies through cover. Most importantly, they seem to possess an almost supernatural awareness of when a good fight is about to break out, probably a function of their psychic sensitivity to the emotions of other nearby orcs. The orc reproductive cycle deserves special attention because it is perhaps their most alien characteristic and the key to understanding why they can never truly be eradicated. Orcs do not reproduce sexually. They have no need for mates, no concept of families in the conventional sense, no childhood in any way that other species would recognize. Instead, orcs release spores. These microscopic fungal pods are shed continuously throughout an orc's life, with massive releases occurring at the moment of death. The spores drift on wind currents, settle into soil, and if conditions are favorable, begin to grow. What emerges from this growth is not a single creature, but an entire ecosystem of orcoid life forms. The spores will first produce the smallest orcoids, snotlings. These tiny creatures cultivate fungi that will provide food for larger orcoids. After the snotlings comes a generation of Gretchen, often called grots, who are larger and more intelligent than snotlings, but still diminutive compared to true orcs. The Gretchen build infrastructure, gather resources, and generally prepare the environment for what comes next. Finally, the full orcs begin to emerge. They crawl from the ground already possessing language, basic tool use, and an overwhelming desire to fight. They are not born helpless like human infants. They emerge as warriors ready for battle, though they will grow and learn as they gain experience. This spore-based reproduction means that every battle, even those the orcs lose, plants the seeds for future orc populations. Kill an orc on a world, and unless you burn the ground where he fell, more orcs will eventually emerge from his spores. This reproductive mechanism makes orcs almost impossible to exterminate once they have gained a foothold on a world. Imperial forces have learned through bitter experience that the only reliable way to ensure no orcs remain is through exterminatus, the complete destruction of all life on the planet. Anything less, and spores will survive to create new generations. Worlds that defeated orc invasions decades or even centuries ago sometimes find themselves facing new threats as dormant spores finally mature into new populations. The genius of this design, the elegant solution to the problem of creating a self-perpetuating military force, becomes clear when you consider it from the perspective of the Old Ones. They needed warriors who could be deployed to a world and left there to fight indefinitely, without support or reinforcement from off-world. Spore-based reproduction ensures that losses in battle are automatically replaced, given sufficient time. The entire orcoid ecosystem, from snotlings to squigs to orcs themselves, supports the continuation of warfare without any external input required. Every aspect of orc physiology serves the purpose for which they were created. The photosynthetic skin reduces food requirements. The hybrid animal fungal cells provide resilience and regeneration. The simplified internal structure reduces vulnerabilities. The incredible strength allows them to function as effective warriors, even with crude equipment. The growth through combat ensures that the best fighters become the leaders. The spore-based reproduction turns every battlefield into a factory for future soldiers. The orcs are not strong despite their biology. They are strong precisely because of it. They were designed from the genetic level upward to be warriors, and that design has proven remarkably durable across millions of years and countless generations. The Old Ones created them to fight forever, and their bodies remain exquisitely adapted to that purpose to this very day. The Gestalt field, reality, bent by belief. There exists a phenomenon among the orcs that defies conventional understanding, that challenges the very foundations of physical law, that represents perhaps their most profound and terrifying strength. The orcs generate a collective psychic field of such power that it can alter reality itself. This Gestalt field is not the product of conscious effort or deliberate manipulation. Rather, it emerges spontaneously from the subconscious minds of orcs gathering together, growing stronger with every additional greenskin added to the mob. The existence and nature of this field has been the subject of considerable debate among imperial scholars. Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos have studied it. Magos biologis of the Adeptus Mechanicus have attempted to measure it. Librarians of the Adeptus Astartes have probed it with their own psychic senses. The consensus, such as it is, suggests that the field represents a form of psychic power fundamentally different from traditional warp manipulation. Unlike human psychers who channel the raw energies of the Imperium, orcs tap into something more primal, more direct. Their Gestalt field does not draw heavily from the warp itself, but rather from the collective unconscious of the orc race. When orcs believe something to be true, when enough of them share that belief with sufficient intensity, the Gestalt field makes it so, not through magic, not through violation of physical laws, but through subtle manipulation of probability, reinforcement of existing mechanisms, and filling in the gaps where conventional science cannot fully explain outcomes. This is a crucial distinction that is often misunderstood. The orc Gestalt field does not allow them to simply wish things into existence. An orc cannot make a rock float by believing hard enough. What the field does is amplify and enhance things that are already partially functional. It is the difference between something that should work but doesn't, and something that shouldn't work but does. Consider orc weapons. A typical orc shooter appears to be little more than a crude assemblage of metal scraps, held together with rivets and prayer. The barrel might be slightly bent. The firing mechanism could be missing critical components. The ammunition might consist of whatever metal chunks happen to be laying around. By all rights, such a weapon should jam after the first shot, or possibly explode in the wielder's hands. Yet in Ork hands, these weapons function with deadly effectiveness. The Gestalt field fills in the gaps, smoothing over the imperfections, ensuring that the bullet finds its way through the bent barrel, that the improvised firing mechanism sparks at just the right moment, that the random metal chunks fly more or less in the intended direction. The weapon works because the Ork believes it will work, and the Gestalt field makes that belief reality. But take that same weapon and place it in human hands, and suddenly the illusion crumbles. Without the Ork's subconscious psychic support, the weapon is revealed for what it truly is: a barely functional assemblage of scrap that will likely jam or misfire. This is why captured Ork weapons are generally considered useless by Imperial forces. They were never designed to function through conventional means. They require the Gestalt field to operate, and only Orks generate that field. The phenomenon extends beyond weapons. Ork vehicles appear to be cobbled together from random parts, held together with spot welds and sheer stubbornness. Engines that should seize up after the first kilometer somehow continue running for months. Armor plating riveted haphazardly provides protection that engineers insist should be impossible given the gaps and weak points. The vehicles function because the Orks operating them believe they will function, and the Gestalt field obliges. Color plays a particularly interesting role in Ork belief systems, and consequently in how the Gestalt field operates. Orks universally believe that red vehicles go faster, not that they should go faster, but that they do go faster. And because enough Orks believe this with absolute certainty, the Gestalt field makes it true. A vehicle painted red will indeed move slightly faster than an identical vehicle painted a different color, not because of any aerodynamic or mechanical advantage, but because reality bends to accommodate Ork belief. Yellow is believed to create bigger explosions. Purple is believed to be the sneakiest color, making things harder to see. Blue is considered lucky. Black is seen as dead-ard. Each of these beliefs, shared by millions upon millions of Orks across the galaxy, becomes self-fulfilling through the power of the Gestalt field. The effects are subtle, not game-changing on their own, but they accumulate. A red vehicle that is also painted with yellow flames and adorned with blue and black checks becomes objectively better than one with a plain paint job, purely because the Orks believe it will be. The true power of the Gestalt field reveals itself most dramatically when large numbers of Orks gather together.
You know, I've been studying Warhammer lore for quite a while, and the Orks remain my favorite faction, for one simple reason: they're honest. In a galaxy filled with scheming Eldar and desperate humans clinging to a rotting empire, and chaos gods playing with souls like toys, Orks are refreshingly straightforward. They fight because they love fighting. There's something almost pure about that, in a twisted way. What really fascinates me is how Games Workshop created a faction that's simultaneously comic relief and genuinely terrifying. On one hand, you have greenskins arguing whether red makes things go faster. On the other, you have the War of the Beasts nearly destroying humanity. That balance is incredibly difficult to achieve in storytelling, and I think that's why the Orks have endured so long as a beloved faction. Every time I dive deeper into their lore, I find myself appreciating the old one's design philosophy more. Anyways, back to the story.
A single Ork generates a field barely worth measuring. A dozen Orks together create noticeable effects. 100 Orks begin to significantly alter probability in their favor. But when thousands or tens of thousands of Orks mass for battle, when the war frenzy takes hold and their collective emotional state reaches fever pitch, the Gestalt field becomes a palpable force that can be felt by psychers kilometers away. This is when the most dramatic manifestations occur. Weapons that should have run out of ammunition continue firing. Vehicles that should have broken down charge forward. Warriors who should have fallen from their wounds fight on through sheer stubborn refusal to acknowledge their injuries. The battlefield itself seems to warp around the orc horde, probability shifting to favor the greenskins. Shots that should have missed find their targets. Cover that should have protected instead crumbles. The universe bends to accommodate the will of the green tide. Among the orcs, there exist individuals who can consciously tap into and manipulate the Gestalt field. These are the Weird Boys, and they are both the most powerful and most tragic figures in orc society. Unlike typical psychers who generate their own power, Weird Boys act as living conduits for the Gestalt field. They absorb the psychic energy radiating from other orcs and channel it into devastating attacks. The life of a Weird Boy is one of constant pain and danger. Simply being near other orcs causes them discomfort as energy builds up within their bodies. When orcs become excited, particularly during battle, the energy intensifies to agonizing levels. A Weird Boy caught in the middle of a large mob of enthusiastic orcs will begin to experience what they call the Eidbang, a catastrophic overload that causes their head to literally explode from the pressure of accumulated psychic energy. Often, the psychic backlash is so powerful that nearby orcs' heads explode as well, creating a chain reaction of detonating skulls. To protect themselves and manage this dangerous power, Weird Boys employ several strategies. They live apart from other orcs when possible, in structures built on copper stilts that help ground excess energy into the earth. They carry copper staffs that serve a similar purpose, providing a path for energy to discharge safely. They wear brightly colored clothing covered in bells and noisemakers, so that other orcs can hear them coming and avoid getting too close. Despite these precautions, many Weird Boys die young, their bodies unable to withstand the strain of channeling so much raw power. Those Weird Boys who survive long enough to master their abilities become formidable weapons in their own right. They can vomit streams of crackling green energy that melt through armor and flesh alike. They can unleash waves of force that send enemies flying. They can teleport themselves and nearby orcs across the battlefield in a feat known as day jump. Some can even transform enemies into squigs, small aggressive creatures that the orcs find useful and amusing in equal measure. A subset of Weird Boys known as warpheads actually come to enjoy the sensation of channeling power, becoming addicted to the rush of energy flowing through their bodies. These individuals actively seek out large mobs of orcs and revel in the violence of combat, riding the wave of psychic force to its peak before releasing it in spectacular displays of destruction. Other orcs find warpheads entertaining but also deeply unsettling, as even by orc standards, they are unhinged and unpredictable. The Gestalt field has implications that extend far beyond enhanced weapons or psychic powers. It influences orc growth rates, making them develop faster in the presence of other orcs. It may contribute to their remarkable healing abilities, as the collective belief in their own toughness helps make them genuinely tougher. It certainly plays a role in their social structure, as an orc who believes himself to be the biggest and strongest is actually made more so by his own confidence, creating a feedback loop that reinforces natural hierarchies. Perhaps most significantly, the Gestalt field is why orcs grow more dangerous the more of them gather together. This is not merely a matter of numerical superiority. 1,000 orcs are not just 1,000 individual warriors, but 1,000 warriors each empowered by the combined psychic field they generate together. Their weapons work better, their vehicles perform more reliably, their leaders become more cunning. The whole becomes genuinely greater than the sum of its parts. This represents a fundamental strategic problem for those who fight against orcs. The conventional military wisdom of destroying enemy forces piecemeal, of picking off isolated units before confronting the main body, works less well against greenskins. Every delay, every day spent mopping up stragglers, allows the main orc force to grow stronger as more of them gather together and their collective field intensifies. Strike too late, and you may find yourself facing an enemy far more formidable than intelligence suggested was possible. The old ones, in their wisdom or perhaps their desperation, engineered the Gestalt field into the very genetic structure of their warrior race. They gave the Orks a tool that would allow their crude weapons and ramshackle vehicles to function effectively. They provided a mechanism whereby larger armies would become exponentially more dangerous. They created a species whose collective belief could reshape reality itself in subtle but significant ways. Modern Orks understand none of this, of course. They have no concept of Gestalt fields or psychic phenomena. They simply know that when they paint something red, it goes faster. When they gather in large numbers, they become unstoppable. When the war frenzy takes hold, nothing can stand against them. They do not question why this is so, any more than a human questions why they feel hungry when they have not eaten. It simply is a fundamental truth of existence. And perhaps that unquestioning belief, that absolute certainty, untroubled by doubt or analysis, is what makes the Gestalt field so powerful. The Orks do not hope their weapons will work or think they might work. They know their weapons will work, with the same deep certainty that they know the sky is above and the ground is below. That bedrock conviction, multiplied across billions of Orks spread throughout the galaxy, generates a psychic force of staggering magnitude. This is one of the great advantages the Orks possess that other races lack. No matter how dark the situation becomes, no matter how badly outnumbered or outgunned they might be, Orks never doubt that they can win. They never question whether their crude tactics will succeed. They never wonder if their improvised equipment will fail them. They simply charge forward with absolute confidence, and the universe, unable to resist such certainty, bends to accommodate them. The Gestalt field is not magic. It is not divine intervention. It is the weaponization of belief, the transformation of conviction into tangible power. It is one of the Old Ones' greatest achievements, a tool that has allowed their creation to thrive for millions of years after their creators vanished. And it is, perhaps more than any other single factor, the reason why the Orks remain such a persistent and formidable threat to every other species in the galaxy. Weapons of scrap and thunder. Ork technology. The first time an Imperial Guard commander sees an Ork army take to the field, a common reaction is disbelief, followed swiftly by inappropriate laughter. The vehicles look like they were assembled by blind scavengers using only items found in a refuse pit. The weapons appear to be held together more by hope than by engineering. The armor seems to consist of random metal plates bolted onto the nearest available surface. Everything is loud, smoke-belching, crude, and seemingly held together by nothing more substantial than wishful thinking. Then the Orks open fire, and the laughter dies. Ork technology represents a fascinating convergence of instinctive genetic knowledge, collective psychic phenomena, and genuine, if unconventional, engineering skill. To understand it, one must first understand the Mech Boys, the technical caste among Ork society, who design and build the weapons, vehicles, and equipment that keep the Green Tide mobile and armed. Mech Boys are not trained in their craft. They do not attend schools or apprentice under masters. Instead, they are born with an intuitive understanding of technology encoded directly into their genes, part of the legacy left by the Old Ones. As a Mech Boy grows and matures, knowledge bubbles up from somewhere deep in his brain. He suddenly understands how to wire together an engine. He knows which pieces of scrap metal will withstand the stress of firing a big gun. He can look at a pile of components and see, without conscious thought, how they might fit together into something useful. This genetic knowledge is not comprehensive or systematic in the way that Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests understand their craft. A Mech Boy cannot explain why something works, only that it does. He operates on instinct and inspiration rather than theory and calculation. But for all its lack of formal rigor, this approach produces results. Mech Boys can cobble together functional weapons and vehicles from materials that Imperial engineers would dismiss as worthless scrap. The most basic orc weapon is the shooter, a crude automatic weapon that fires solid projectiles at high velocity. In appearance, a shooter looks like someone welded together random pieces of pipe, attached a box to hold ammunition, and called it finished. The barrel is often unrifled or poorly rifled. The firing mechanism consists of a hammer that strikes a crude primer. The whole assembly is held together with rivets and occasionally actual rope. Yet shooters work, after their fashion. They are inaccurate by the standards of Imperial weapons, spraying bullets in a general forward direction, rather than hitting specific targets with precision. But orcs compensate for this lack of accuracy with sheer volume of fire and their natural strength, allowing them to control weapons that would overwhelm lesser races with recoil. A mob of orc boys advancing while firing their shooters creates a wall of lead that shreds everything in its path through sheer statistical inevitability. For close combat, orcs favor choppers, essentially oversized axes or cleavers made from whatever metal was available. A chupa might be a sharpened piece of industrial machinery. It might be a captured Imperial weapon with extra blades welded on. It might be something that started life as a simple club, but had sharp edges added because, well, sharp things cut better. The variety is endless, limited only by the mech's imagination and available materials. These crude weapons become truly dangerous in orc hands. The combination of orc strength and the psychic reinforcement of the Gestalt field allows a chupa to cut through armor that should resist such primitive implements. Space Marines have fallen to chopper blows, their ceramite armor cleaved by weapons that look like they came from a fantasy novel rather than a futuristic battlefield. The weapon works because the orc swinging it believes it will work, and that belief, channeled through the Gestalt field, makes it devastatingly effective. For orcs who want more stopping power, there are the big shooters, massive weapons that would serve as crew-served machine guns in human armies, but which orcs wield one-handed, thanks to their prodigious strength. These weapons fire heavier projectiles at higher rates, creating a continuous stream of destruction. The recoil would break the arms of a normal human. An orc just laughs and pulls the trigger harder. When orcs need to deal with armored targets, they turn to rockets, self-propelled explosive warheads that streak toward their targets, trailing smoke and noise. Orc rockets are notoriously unreliable, prone to veering off course or exploding prematurely, but they are also cheap to manufacture and effective enough when they actually hit their targets. Orcs compensate for low individual reliability by simply building and firing more rockets, trusting in volume to make up for quality. Perhaps the most iconic orc weapon is the Power Claw, a massive hydraulic claw capable of crushing tanks and tearing through bunkers. Power claws are usually reserved for nobs and war bosses, the biggest and most successful orcs who have earned the right to such formidable weapons. The claws operate through a combination of hydraulic pressure and energy fields that disrupt molecular bonds, allowing them to shear through materials that should be impervious to physical force. The fact that orcs can manufacture power claws, weapons that require sophisticated understanding of energy field technology, demonstrates that their technical capabilities are far greater than their crude aesthetics suggest. The knowledge is there, buried in the genetic legacy of the Krork, waiting to be accessed by mech boys with enough skill and experience. The most accomplished big mechs can produce weapons that rival or exceed Imperial equivalents, though they will still look like they were assembled in a junkyard. Orc vehicles follow the same pattern of appearing crude while being surprisingly effective. The most common orc transport is the truck, an open-topped vehicle that looks like someone welded together a flatbed truck frame with whatever parts happen to be available. The engine is typically a massive smoke-belching monstrosity held together with chains and hope. The armor consists of random plates bolted to the frame at odd angles. The whole assembly rattles and groans as it moves, shedding parts and leaving a trail of smoke and oil. Yet trucks can transport orc boys across broken terrain at speeds that shouldn't be possible, given their ramshackle construction. The combination of Gestalt field support and mech-boy intuition produces vehicles that function far better than their appearance suggests. They might be loud, they might be crude, they might be uncomfortable, but they get Orks where they need to go, and in the end, that is all that matters. For heavier transport and direct fire support, Orks build battle wagons, massive armored vehicles bristling with weapons. A battle wagon typically mounts a collection of big shooters, rockets, and often a large siege weapon like a kill cannon or a zap gun. The armor is thick enough to shrug off small arms fire and even some anti-tank weapons. The carrying capacity allows it to transport entire mobs of boys directly into combat. Battle wagons demonstrate Ork engineering at its most ambitious. Creating a vehicle of such size and complexity requires considerable skill, even with genetic knowledge to guide the work. The power plant must generate enough energy to move many tons of armor while also powering multiple weapon systems. The chassis must be sturdy enough to hold together despite the stresses of combat and rough terrain. The control systems must be simple enough for an Ork to operate while still providing adequate maneuverability. That mech boys can accomplish this using salvaged components and improvised techniques speaks to the sophistication hidden beneath their crude methods. They might not understand thermodynamics or materials science in any formal sense, but their intuitive grasp of what works allows them to solve complex engineering problems through trial and error, backed by genetic insight. Ork walkers represent another category of vehicle that showcases their technical abilities. Killer Khans are small walkers piloted by Gretchen, mounting heavy weapons and providing fire support. Def Dreads are larger, Ork-piloted walkers that combine close combat power with ranged weapons, stomping across battlefields while gunning down enemies. These walkers require sophisticated balance systems, articulated joints, and coordinated control interfaces, yet mech boys build them from scrap, using nothing more than instinct and determination. The pinnacle of Ork walker technology is the Gorkanaut and Morkanaut, massive machines the size of Imperial knights. These walking fortresses mount enormous weapons, can transport multiple Orks, and possess armor thick enough to shrug off even heavy ordnance. Building one requires a big mech of considerable skill and experience, along with a large supply of materials and components. The resulting machine is a terror on the battlefield, advancing with thundering steps while its weapons tear through enemy formations. Some Ork weapons are so bizarre that they seem to operate on principles unknown to conventional physics. The shock attack gun, for instance, is a weapon that creates a temporary warp tunnel and fires snotlings through it directly into enemy units or vehicles. The snotlings emerge inside the target, causing catastrophic damage as they materialize within vital systems or the bodies of enemy soldiers. This weapon requires an understanding of warp physics that seems far beyond what crude Orks should possess. Yet big mechs build them, and Orks use them with casual disregard for the cosmic horror they represent. The bubble chucker fires unstable force field bubbles that vary wildly in size and effect. Sometimes they burst with tremendous force, devastating everything nearby. Other times they pop harmlessly like soap bubbles. The unpredictability is part of the weapon's charm from an Ork perspective. Every shot is a surprise, and occasionally you get lucky and cause truly spectacular damage. The lifter-dropper uses gravitational manipulation to pick up enemy vehicles or even enemy warriors and hurl them through the air. Watching a 50-ton tank get plucked off the ground and thrown hundreds of meters before crashing to Earth provides Orks with endless entertainment, while effectively removing the target from battle. The technology required to generate controlled gravitational fields should be beyond Ork capabilities, yet they build and use these weapons regularly. These exotic weapons demonstrate something crucial about Ork technology. Their genetic legacy from the Krork includes knowledge of advanced physics and engineering principles that modern Orks do not consciously understand, but can still access intuitively. A big mech. Building a shock attack gun has no formal education in warp theory. He simply knows, the way a bird knows how to build a nest, that if he wires certain components together in a particular configuration and channels power through them, he can tear a hole in reality and push things through it. This instinctive knowledge explains why Ork technology often functions despite appearing impossible. The mech boys are tapping into engineering principles that even the Adeptus Mechanicus does not fully understand. Using techniques lost to humanity during the dark age of technology, the crude exterior hides sophisticated understanding, even if that understanding exists only at a subconscious level. The Gestalt field plays its role as well. When a mech boy builds a weapon, his belief that it will work helps smooth over any minor flaws in construction. When an Ork fires that weapon, his certainty that it will destroy the target helps ensure that it does. The combination of genetic knowledge and psychic support allows Ork technology to punch well above its weight class in terms of effectiveness. This creates a peculiar situation where Ork weapons and vehicles are simultaneously primitive and advanced. They are primitive in their construction, using crude techniques and improvised materials, but they are advanced in their underlying principles, incorporating technology that equals or exceeds Imperial capabilities. An Ork shooter is less accurate than an Imperial laser gun, but might fire a higher caliber round with more stopping power. An Ork rocket is less reliable than an Imperial missile, but might carry a larger warhead. An Ork battle wagon is less refined than an Imperial chimera, but might have thicker armor and heavier weapons. For Imperial forces, captured Ork technology represents a peculiar kind of frustration. The weapons are right there, visible and tangible. But when humans try to use them, they discover that the weapons do not work as advertised. Shooters jam after a few shots. Vehicles break down or refuse to start. The technology requires the Gestalt field to function properly, and humans do not generate that field. It is like trying to use a tool designed for beings with 3 hands, functional in theory, but impossible in practice. There are rare exceptions. Commissar Yarrick famously wielded an Ork power claw taken as a trophy, and it functioned for him. But Yarrick was a special case, a human who had fought Orks for so long, and with such success, that the Orks themselves believed he could use their weapons. That belief, shared by millions of Orks, made it true through the Gestalt field. For ordinary humans, Ork weapons remain tantalizing but unusable prizes. The versatility of Ork technology deserves special mention. Because mech boys work from intuition rather than rigid templates, they can adapt their designs to whatever materials are available. An Ork warband stranded on a primitive world will build weapons from wood and stone. An Ork warband in an industrial zone will build weapons from steel and ceramics. An Ork warband in the wreckage of a space battle will build weapons from starship components. The underlying knowledge remains constant, even as the materials and specific implementations vary. This adaptability makes Orks incredibly difficult to defeat through economic means. You cannot deprive them of munitions or spare parts because they manufacture everything themselves from local materials. You cannot disrupt their supply lines because they do not have supply lines in the conventional sense. Every mech boy is a factory. Every pile of scrap is a potential armory. As long as Orks survive and materials exist, they will continue producing weapons and vehicles. The crude appearance of Ork technology is, in many ways, a deliberate choice rather than a limitation. Orks could build weapons and vehicles that look more refined if they wanted to. But refined means boring, and boring goes against fundamental Ork nature. They prefer their weapons to be loud, their vehicles to be fast and terrifying, their equipment to proclaim its violent purpose to anyone who sees it. The crudeness is an aesthetic choice, a cultural expression of Ork values. Underneath that crude exterior lies capability that should not be underestimated. Ork weapons kill as effectively as their Imperial equivalents. Ork vehicles transport troops and provide fire support as reliably as anything the Imperium fields. Ork walkers stomp across battlefields just as impressively as their Imperial knight counterparts. The difference is one of style rather than substance, and style does not determine the outcome of battles. This is the final lesson of Ork technology. Never judge it by appearance alone. That ramshackle mess of welded scrap and improvised components is fully capable of killing you. The vehicle that looks like it should fall apart at the first bump will charge across the battlefield and deliver its cargo of warriors directly into your lines. The weapon that appears to be held together with wire and rust will fire enough bullets to cut through your armor and end your existence. The Orks build weapons and vehicles that match their nature: crude, loud, violent, and devastatingly effective. They are the products of a warrior race created by beings who understood warfare at the deepest levels, and they fulfill their purpose admirably. In a galaxy at war, that is all that matters. The art of the charge, Ork, warfare and tactics. To observe an Ork army on the march is to witness what appears to be organized chaos. There are no neat ranks, no synchronized movements, no parade ground precision. Instead, you see a roiling mass of green bodies, vehicles belching smoke, walkers clanking forward, all moving in roughly the same direction while seemingly independent of any central control. Orks shout at each other, fire weapons into the air for no apparent reason, occasionally stop to have quick brawls with their comrades before resuming the advance. It looks like disorder incarnate. Then battle is joined, and you realize that what appeared to be chaos was actually a highly effective, if unconventional, tactical approach perfectly suited to Ork nature and capabilities. Ork warfare revolves around a fundamental principle: get close to the enemy and overwhelm them through ferocity and numbers. This is not a sophisticated strategy. It requires no brilliant tactical innovation or complex logistical planning, but it works, and it works consistently, because Orks are biologically and psychologically optimized for exactly this kind of combat. The typical Ork advance begins with a period of gathering. Orks from various tribes and clans converge on a target, drawn by the promise of violence and the infectious enthusiasm of other greenskins preparing for war. This gathering has a snowball effect. The presence of some Orks attracts more Orks, which in turn attracts even more, until what began as a minor raid has grown into a full-scale invasion. The gestalt field strengthens with each additional warrior, making the mob more dangerous exponentially rather than linearly. Once sufficient numbers have gathered, the advance begins. Ork boys, the infantry backbone of any Ork army, move forward in massive groups called mobs. These mobs might contain dozens or even hundreds of warriors, all armed with choppers and shooters or sluggers, ready to butcher anything that stands in their way. The mob provides mutual support, with each Ork emboldened by the presence of his fellows. An individual Ork might hesitate before charging into a fortified position. 100 Orks together know no such doubt. The advance is supported by vehicles racing ahead, carrying more boys and mounting heavier weapons. Trucks speed forward, their passengers hanging off the sides and firing wildly. Battle wagons lumber along, their armor providing mobile cover, while their weapons soften up enemy positions. Bikes and buggies zoom past, piloted by speed freaks who live for the thrill of velocity and the rush of wind against green skin. This mechanized component adds mobility and hitting power to the raw mass of infantry. Walking alongside or sometimes through the infantry mobs come the walkers. Killer Khans, piloted by Gretchen, provide close fire support with their heavy weapons. Def Dreads, crewed by Orks who have been permanently installed within their machines, combine firepower with close combat capability. The larger Gorkanauts and Morkanauts stride forward like mobile fortresses, their presence inspiring Orks and terrifying enemies in equal measure. Above, in some engagements, Ork aircraft streak across the sky. Dakajets strafe ground targets with sustained bursts from their multiple guns. Blasterjets drop crude bombs on enemy formations. Fighter bombers engage enemy aircraft while also supporting ground forces. These flyers are as ramshackle as everything else Orks build, but they fulfill their role of providing air superiority, or at least denying it to the enemy. As the Ork army approaches enemy positions, the shooting begins in earnest. Orks are not known for their marksmanship, and individual accuracy matters little to them. What they lack in precision, they compensate for with volume. hundreds of shooters fire simultaneously, creating a wall of bullets that saturates the target area. Some shots miss by meters. Some find their marks through sheer chance. Enough shots are fired that statistical inevitability ensures enemy casualties mount. The heavier weapons add their voices to the cacophony. Big shooters hammer away at enemy armor and fortifications. Rockets streak toward tanks and bunkers. Lob artillery pieces lob explosive shells in high arcs. The individual effectiveness of any single weapon might be questionable, but the combined effect of dozens or hundreds of weapons firing together creates a barrage that suppresses enemy fire and causes genuine damage. During this approach phase, enemy forces often make the mistake of believing they are winning. The Orks take casualties as they advance across open ground. Warriors fall, vehicles brew up, walkers topple. But the losses do not slow the advance because Orks do not process casualties the way other races do. A Space Marine chapter that loses half its strength retreats to rebuild. An Imperial Guard regiment that suffers 30% casualties begins to lose cohesion. Orks simply keep coming, the survivors stepping over the fallen without a second thought. This psychological difference is crucial to understanding Ork tactics. They are not brave in the conventional sense, because bravery implies overcoming fear. Orks do not experience battle fear the way other species do. They are too excited by the prospect of violence, too caught up in the collective energy of the mob, too convinced of their own toughness to seriously consider the possibility of defeat. Fear of death is replaced by enthusiasm for fighting, creating warriors who advance with genuine joy rather than grim determination. As the range closes, the Ork battle cry rises from thousands of throats. This is not a planned action, not something coordinated by leadership. It emerges spontaneously from the mob, each Ork adding his voice to a thunder that can be heard for kilometers. The sound serves multiple purposes. It intimidates enemies who hear the raw violence promised by that bestial roar. It further pumps up the Orks themselves, feeding the collective energy that strengthens the Gestalt field. And it announces to everyone present that the real fighting is about to begin. The final charge, when it comes, is a sight that has broken the will of veteran guardsmen and tested even Space Marines. Hundreds or thousands of Orks surge forward at full speed, choppers held high, sluggas blazing, bellowing their enthusiasm for the violence to come. They do not advance in neat lines. They do not maintain formation. They charge as an avalanche of green flesh and crude iron, each Ork racing his fellows to be the first to strike the enemy. The speed of an Ork charge can surprise those unfamiliar with greenskin capabilities. Despite their bulk and their crude armor, Orks move with surprising quickness when properly motivated. Their powerful legs eat up ground at an impressive pace. Vehicles accelerate to speeds that should tear their ramshackle construction apart, but somehow hold together through Gestalt support and mech boy skill. The entire army hits the enemy line like a green tsunami. Close combat, the ultimate goal of all Ork tactics, is where they truly excel. This is what every Ork lives for, the glorious melee where chopper meets armor and strength is pitted against strength. In close quarters, Ork advantages become overwhelming. Their physical power allows them to strike with devastating force. Their crude weapons, reinforced by the Gestalt field and wielded with tremendous strength, cleave through armor that should resist such primitive implements. Their resilience allows them to absorb wounds that would drop lesser warriors. An Ork mob that reaches close combat with an enemy unit will likely destroy that unit. The mathematics are brutal. Each Ork swings his chopper with the strength to decapitate a man in a single blow. Multiply that by dozens or hundreds of Orks, all attacking simultaneously, and the result is devastating. Enemy formations dissolve under the onslaught, soldiers going down under a storm of crude but effective violence. Even Space Marines can be overwhelmed when sufficient Orks press the attack. Leadership within Ork armies is informal but effective. The biggest Ork is typically in charge. not through any formal rank structure, but simply because he is the biggest and therefore the most dangerous. Knobs, larger and more successful orcs, lead smaller groups through force of personality and willingness to crack skulls when necessary. War bosses command entire armies because they have proven through countless battles that they are the toughest orcs around. These leaders do not issue complex orders or develop sophisticated plans. Orc strategy typically consists of see enemy, charge enemy, hit enemy with chopper. But this simplicity is deceptive. Within that basic framework, successful orc leaders demonstrate considerable tactical flexibility. They know when to commit reserves. They understand which targets to prioritize. They can read a battlefield and adapt to changing circumstances, all while maintaining the aggressive forward momentum that is the hallmark of orc warfare. Some orc clans have developed specialized tactical approaches that suit their particular preferences. The Goths, for instance, focus heavily on close combat, fielding massive mobs of boys armed primarily with choppers. They see shooters as something you use while running toward the enemy, and the real fight begins when blades meet flesh. Goth tactics involve closing distance as quickly as possible, and then overwhelming the enemy through sheer melee prowess. The Evil Sons, by contrast, love speed above all else. Their tactics revolve around fast vehicles and bikes, racing around the battlefield to hit enemy flanks and rear areas. They paint everything red because red makes it go faster, and they mount as many boys as possible on wheels or tracks. Evil Sons hit and run, charge and withdraw, creating chaos and confusion through mobility rather than sustained pressure. The Bad Moons are the richest orcs, their teeth growing fastest and therefore giving them more currency to spend. They field better equipment than other clans, with more shooters, bigger guns, and flashier gear. Bad Moon tactics lean more heavily on firepower than most orc armies, though they still appreciate a good charge when the opportunity presents itself. The Blood Axes are the most tactically flexible orcs, willing to use strategies that other clans consider unsporting. They retreat when necessary, use cover and concealment, and sometimes even coordinate with other units in ways that approach conventional military doctrine. Other orcs view Blood Axes with suspicion for these habits. But the Blood Axes do not care because their methods work. Regardless of clan affiliation, all orc armies benefit from certain tactical abilities that emerge from their unique nature. Once per major engagement, when the energy and enthusiasm of the orc force reaches its peak, something special happens. The war cry rises to deafening levels, the Gestalt field surges with power, and every orc in the army is suddenly stronger, tougher, and more aggressive. This battle frenzy, this peak moment of orc enthusiasm made manifest through psychic power, turns an already dangerous army into an unstoppable force. During this surge, orcs can charge after running, their momentum carrying them into combat faster than should be physically possible. Their melee weapons strike with enhanced power. The Gestalt field, lending supernatural strength to already prodigious blows. They shrug off wounds that would have dropped them moments before, toughness amplified by collective psychic energy. For a brief period, the orcs become more than themselves, elevated to something approaching their Krork ancestors in raw combat capability. Timing this surge correctly separates good orc leaders from great ones. Call it too early, and you waste its power on enemies who are not yet sufficiently weakened. Call it too late, and you might have already lost too many boys to make effective use of it. The best war bosses have an instinct for the perfect moment, that precise point when enemy resistance is wavering but not yet broken, when one final push will shatter their lines and turn the battle into a rout. The aftermath of successful orc tactics is predictable. The enemy is driven from the field, their positions overrun, their forces scattered or destroyed. The orcs then loot everything not nailed down, and some things that are. Weapons, vehicles, equipment, all become raw materials for the mech boys to convert into more orc gear. Prisoners may be taken, though not out of any sense of mercy, but rather to use as labor or entertainment. More importantly, the spores released by orcs who died during the battle begin their work. In weeks or months, new orc populations will spring from the ground where battles were fought. The planet has been infected with the green tide, and short of total sterilization through exterminatus, that infection will persist and grow. What began as a single battle becomes the opening move in a longer war as new generations of orcs emerge to continue the fight. This self-perpetuating nature makes orc tactics difficult to counter strategically. Win the battle, and you still face the problem of orc spores ensuring future conflicts. Lose the battle, and the orc presence grows immediately as they loot your equipment and recruit more of their kind. The only winning move is to prevent orc landings entirely, but the sheer number of orc forces spread across the galaxy makes such prevention impossible on a large scale. Orc warfare succeeds not despite its simplicity, but because of it. By reducing combat to its most basic elements, close with the enemy, overwhelm with numbers and ferocity. Claim victory through crude violence. Orcs play to their biological and psychological strengths. They do not need sophisticated logistics because they loot what they need. They do not need complex command structures because their hierarchies emerge naturally from tests of strength. They do not need high morale because they are always in high spirits when fighting is involved. In the end, orc tactics work because orcs love what they do. Other armies fight out of duty or survival or conquest. Orcs fight because fighting is the point of existence. That genuine enthusiasm, that absolute conviction that combat is the best thing in the universe, translates into tactical advantages that more sophisticated armies cannot replicate. It is difficult to break the morale of warriors who view battle as entertainment. It is impossible to intimidate soldiers who are genuinely excited about the prospect of violence. The art of the orc charge is crude, simple, and brutally effective. It has worked for millions of years. It continues to work in the 41st millennium, and it will doubtless continue working for as long as orcs exist to practice it. This is not warfare as the Imperium understands it, not combat as the Tau would recognize it, not battle as the Eldar would wage it. This is violence as primal expression, war as its own justification, combat as the highest form of existence. This is orc warfare, and it is terrifyingly successful. The War of the Beast, when orcs nearly won. In the mid-32nd millennium, approximately 1500 years after the Horus heresy nearly destroyed humanity, the Imperium faced a threat that would come closer to total annihilation than anything since the War Master's betrayal. This was not chaos resurgent from the Eye of Terror. It was not Tyranids pouring in from beyond the galaxy's rim. It was not Necrons awakening from their ancient slumber. It was orcs, but orcs unlike any seen before or since, organized under a leader whose intelligence and strategic capability defied everything the Imperium thought it knew about greenskins. The War of the Beast began in 544 in the 32nd millennium, and for 2 years it would rage across the Imperium, threatening the very existence of humanity itself. To understand its significance, we must first understand the context in which it occurred. Following the Horus heresy, the Imperium entered a period known as the Time of Rebirth. The wounds of civil war were healing. The Space Marine legions had been broken into smaller chapters to prevent any future betrayal. The Imperium's military might was being rebuilt and reorganized. After the trauma of brother fighting brother, there was cautious optimism that perhaps the worst was behind them. The orcs were not considered a major threat during this period. They had been severely mauled during the Great Crusade, particularly at Ullanor, where Horus had earned his Warmaster title by crushing the largest orc empire known to that date. Imperial strategists believed the greenskin threat had been relegated to minor raids and border skirmishes, irritating but not existential. The vast bulk of Imperial naval forces were deployed to the far frontiers, patrolling borders and hunting pirates, leaving the inner systems lightly defended. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong. The first sign that something was different came on the world of Ardamantua, a planet just 6 weeks warp travel from Terra itself. The Imperial Fist's Space Marine chapter had deployed their entire shield company to deal with an infestation of insectoid aliens called the Chromes. What they found instead was an Ork force unlike any they had encountered. These greenskins fought with coordination and discipline that seemed impossible for their species. They employed tactics that suggested strategic thinking, and they were building something, a massive construction that caused gravitational disturbances across the entire planet. Before the Imperial Fists could determine what they faced, the unthinkable happened. What they had thought was a planetary defensive structure revealed itself as something far worse, an attack moon. This was not a natural satellite, but a massive, artificially constructed battle station built by Orks and capable of destroying entire worlds. The attack moon activated, and Ardamantua was torn apart. The entire shield company of Imperial Fists died in the destruction, save for one, Captain Courland. He would carry the news back to Terra, a warning that proved far too late. The Orks were not coming. They were already here, and they possessed technology and organization that defied everything the Imperium believed possible for greenskins. The attacks escalated with horrifying speed. Ork fleets appeared throughout the Imperium, each led by attack moons that could crack planetary crusts with their weapons. These were not the ramshackle spacecraft typically associated with Orks, but sophisticated vessels that demonstrated advanced understanding of physics and engineering. The greenskins fought with unprecedented coordination, suggesting a level of organization that should have been impossible for their species. At the heart of this invasion was a figure known only as the Beast. Reports described him as massive beyond belief, standing as tall as an Imperial knight. His intelligence matched or exceeded that of human commanders. He spoke flawless Gothic, the Imperium's common tongue, and demonstrated strategic acumen that would have impressed the greatest military minds. The Beast was not merely leading a typical Ork crusade. He was orchestrating a campaign designed to destroy the Imperium systematically. The most shocking revelation came when Ork ambassadors, and concept almost incomprehensible to Imperial understanding, arrived at Terra itself demanding humanity's surrender. The Orks did not come to fight or raid. They came to deliver an ultimatum: submit or be destroyed. The audacity of it staggered Imperial leadership. These were not mindless brutes. These were sophisticated beings pursuing a calculated strategy for conquest. The demands were refused, of course. The Imperium of man does not surrender, not even in the face of annihilation. But the psychological impact of Ork ambassadors speaking with eloquence and intelligence rattled the Imperium to its core. Everything they thought they knew about the greenskin threat was wrong. Then came the unthinkable. Orks attacked Terra itself. An attack moon penetrated the system's defenses and established orbit around humanity's throne world. The very heart of the Imperium was under direct threat. If Terra fell, if the Emperor's seat was taken by greenskins, the Imperium would shatter into 1,000 warring fragments. Everything would be lost. The Imperial Fists, defenders of Terra, rallied to repel the invasion. The fighting was brutal beyond description. Orks poured from the attack moon in numbers that seemed inexhaustible, each one larger and better equipped than typical greenskins. They fought their way through Terra's defenses with savage efficiency, pushing toward the Imperial Palace itself. Only through desperate sacrifice did the Imperial Fists hold. The chapter that had once stood firm during the Horus Heresy now threw itself into the meat grinder of close-quarters combat against an enemy that outnumbered them and matched them in ferocity, if not skill. The Death Company of Space Marines fought and died to buy time for defenses to be organized. Millions of Imperial Guard troops poured into the breach, their laser guns and artillery barely slowing the green tide. The attack moon was finally destroyed through the use of experimental weapons and suicidal boarding actions, but the cost was staggering. The Imperial fists were reduced to a fraction of their original strength. Terra's defenses lay in ruins, and the Imperium now understood, with horrible clarity, that this was not a typical Ork invasion, but an existential threat. Through analysis of captured Ork psykers and interrogation of prisoners, Imperial forces learned the location of the beast's homeworld, Ullanor, the same world where Horus had achieved his greatest triumph 1500 years earlier. The symbolism was not lost on Imperial commanders. The Orks had returned to the scene of their greatest defeat, and from there, they were launching a campaign that dwarfed anything seen during the Great Crusade. The Imperium's response was to gather every available force for a massive counter-offensive. The Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Space Wolves, and Ultramarines all committed troops. The Imperial Guard marshaled regiments by the millions. The Adeptus Mechanicus contributed forces and supplies. It would be the largest military mobilization since the Horus Heresy, all directed at a single target, the beast's seat of power on Ullanor. The first invasion of Ullanor was led by Vulcan, Primarch of the Salamander's Legion, and one of the few Primarchs who had survived into the modern era through the curse of his perpetual nature. He led his forces into the heart of Gorkogrod, the Ork capital city, a massive metropolis that demonstrated Ork engineering at its most impressive. The city was defended by countless greenskins, each one a veteran warrior fanatically devoted to the beast. The fighting in Gorkogrod was close-quarters urban warfare at its most brutal. The Orks refused to meet Imperial forces in open battle, instead drawing them into the city's depths, where superior Imperial firepower was negated by narrow streets and towering structures. Every block had to be cleared, every building secured, every Ork strongpoint assaulted directly. The casualties mounted on both sides, but the Orks seemed limitless in number, while Imperial forces were finite. Vulcan eventually reached the heart of the city where the beast resided in a massive walking fortress called a Temple Gargant. The Primarch charged into the structure alone, intent on facing the Ork warlord in single combat. The battle between them shook the Temple Gargant to its foundations. In the end, Vulcan triggered a massive explosion that destroyed the entire structure, apparently killing both himself and the beast in the conflagration. With their leader dead, Ork resistance on Ullanor collapsed. The Greenskins lost cohesion, their unity shattered. Imperial forces withdrew, believing they had won a decisive victory. The War of the Beast seemed to be over. They were wrong. The second invasion of Ullanor revealed a truth that should have been obvious in hindsight. There was not one beast but 6, each a prime Ork, leading a distinct army. What Imperial forces had killed was merely one of 6 identical leaders, each as intelligent and capable as the original. The Orks had not merely created a single exceptional leader. They had somehow produced multiple prime Orks, each one a throwback to the ancient Krork in terms of size, intelligence, and capability. This second invasion went poorly. The Orks were now alert to Imperial tactics and had fortified Ullanor against another assault. Captain Corland, who had been elevated to chapter master and led this expedition, was killed in the fighting. The Imperium was forced to retreat, their forces mauled and demoralized. The War of the Beast raged on. Only on the third invasion, through the use of redirected asteroids to devastate the planet's surface and the deployment of the Sisters of Silence to neutralize Ork psychic abilities, did the Imperium finally achieve victory. The remaining beasts were slain, Ullanor was rendered uninhabitable, and the Ork threat finally broke. But the cost had been enormous. Entire Space Marine chapters had been wiped out or reduced to handfuls of survivors. Millions of Imperial Guard troops had died. Whole sectors had been depopulated by Ork invasions. The infrastructure damage would take centuries to repair. The Imperium had won, but barely, and only through the most desperate of measures. The War of the Beast had lasting consequences beyond the immediate military impact. It led to the creation of the Ordo Xenos within the Inquisition, an organization specifically dedicated to combating Xenos threats. before they could grow to such magnitude again. It resulted in the formation of the Death Watch, a chapter of space marines drawn from all others and specialized in combating alien species. The military reforms implemented in the war's aftermath would shape Imperial military doctrine for millennia to come. But perhaps the most significant legacy was psychological. The War of the Beast demonstrated that Orks were not the simple-minded brutes the Imperium had assumed them to be. They were capable of organization, of strategic planning, of technological sophistication. The fact that prime Orks could arise, beings who approached or exceeded their Krork ancestors in capability, meant that the greenskin threat could never be considered truly defeated. There is a footnote to the War of the Beast that deserves mention. Following the final victory on Ulanor, the Adeptus Mechanicus was ordered to enact Exterminatus on the planet, sterilizing it completely to prevent any resurgence of Ork populations. The Fabricator General, however, coveted the advanced Ork technology that littered the world. Using experimental teleportation technology, reverse-engineered from Ork designs, he secretly teleported the entire planet to a different location rather than destroying it. That relocated world would eventually become known as Armageddon, and it would be the site of multiple major Ork invasions in the millennia to come. The decision to preserve Ulanor rather than destroy it would haunt the Imperium repeatedly, but that is a story for another time. The War of the Beast represents the closest the Orks have come to total victory over the Imperium. It demonstrated what greenskins are capable of when properly organized under exceptional leadership. It showed that the degradation from Krork to Ork is not necessarily permanent, that given the right circumstances, Orks can regain some measure of their former glory. And it proved beyond doubt that the Ork threat cannot be ignored or underestimated, not even for a moment, because the consequences of such complacency might be the end of everything humanity has built. To this day, Imperial commanders study the War of the Beast as both a historical record and a warning. It reminds them that Orks are not merely a nuisance to be tolerated, but an existential threat that must be contained. It demonstrates the importance of striking at greenskin populations before they can mass in sufficient numbers to become truly dangerous. And it serves as grim evidence of what happens when the galaxy's most numerous and violent species decides to get organized. The War of the Beast is over, but its lessons echo through the millennia. The Orks can be defeated, but only through sustained, brutal effort and tremendous sacrifice. And the possibility always remains that another beast might arise, another prime Ork, who could rally the greenskin race and launch another apocalyptic crusade. The Imperium remains vigilant, but vigilance alone may not be enough if history repeats itself. Masters of war, notable war bosses. Throughout Ork history, certain individuals have risen above the countless masses of greenskins to become legends. These war bosses, through a combination of size, cunning, and sheer violent ability, have gathered armies that threatened entire sectors. They represent Ork potential at its highest expression, and understanding them helps illuminate what makes the greenskin race so persistently dangerous. At the pinnacle of modern Ork leadership stands Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, often called simply Gazkul, or the Beast of Armageddon. He is the most powerful Ork warboss alive in the 41st millennium, and his rise to prominence reads like destiny manifest. Gazkul began as an unremarkable Ork until he was grievously wounded in battle, his skull shattered by a bolt shell. The pain boy who patched him back together installed a crude metal plate to replace the damaged bone, and when Gazkul awoke, he claimed to hear the voices of Gork and Mork speaking to him. Whether these voices were genuine divine communication, the result of brain damage, or something else entirely remains unclear. What is certain is that Gazkul emerged from his injury, convinced he had a destiny to unite all Orks in a great crusade that would conquer the galaxy. He began gathering followers, demonstrating strategic capability and charisma that attracted orcs from multiple clans. His reputation grew with each victory until he commanded one of the largest armies in the galaxy. Gaz-Kul has been the architect of multiple major campaigns, most notably the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon. These conflicts saw millions of orcs pouring onto an industrial world of critical importance to the Imperium, fighting through years of grinding warfare against Imperial Guard forces and multiple Space Marine chapters. Even though Gaz-Kul did not ultimately conquer Armageddon, his ability to sustain such massive campaigns demonstrated organizational skills that orcs should not possess. What makes Gaz-Kul particularly dangerous is his intelligence. He speaks fluent Gothic and understands Imperial culture well enough to predict their responses and exploit their weaknesses. He thinks strategically, not just tactically, planning campaigns that span multiple star systems and years of fighting. He has survived assassination attempts, direct combat with legendary heroes, and even having his head cut off by Ragnar Blackmane of the Space Wolves. The Pain Boys simply stitched his head back onto an even larger body. And Gaz-Kul continued his crusade. Gaz-Kul stands as tall as an Imperial dreadnought, his body a mountain of muscle clad in custom mega armor. His power claw can crush tanks. His force of personality can cow entire mobs into obedience. Where other war bosses are content to raid and pillage, Gaz-Kul envisions something grander, true conquest, the subjugation of the galaxy under orc rule. If any modern orc could unify the species and lead them to total victory, it would be Gaz-Kul. The Beast, leader of the largest orc invasion in recorded history, set a standard that even Gaz-Kul has not yet matched. As discussed in the previous section, the Beast was not merely large and strong, but genuinely intelligent in ways that defied orc norms. He could speak eloquently, plan complex strategies, and coordinate vast forces across multiple star systems. His technology exceeded Imperial capabilities in several domains, and his attack moons represented engineering achievements that the Adeptus Mechanicus still does not fully understand. More than that, the Beast possessed vision. He did not simply want to fight for fighting's sake. He wanted to rule, to establish orc dominance permanently, to build an empire rather than just enjoying brief moments of violence before moving on to the next target. This ambition, combined with his capability, made him perhaps the most dangerous orc who has ever lived. Only through the most desperate measures, including the deployment of a Primarch and multiple invasions that cost untold lives, did the Imperium finally bring him down. Urlak-Urg, the Orc, overlord defeated by Horus during the Ullanor Crusade, represents another historical high point for the species. His empire controlled 12 star systems and fielded armies of such size that the Imperium deployed 100,000 Space Marines, 8 million Imperial Army troops, and thousands of ships to counter the threat. The Lunar Wolves Legion had to fight their way through titanic battles to reach Urlak's fortress palace, and even then, the Overlord and his Nob bodyguards put up a fight that tested even Horus himself. Though ultimately defeated, Urlak's achievement in building such an empire demonstrated what organized orcs could accomplish. His forces fought with discipline unusual for greenskins, suggesting a level of control and coordination that required genuine leadership ability. The fact that it took the War Master himself to bring Urlak down speaks to the Overlord's capability. Nazdreg Urg Erdgrub represents a different type of orc exceptionalism. Rather than relying purely on size and strength, Nazdreg is known for his cunning and his grasp of technology. He commands a space hulk called the Scylla, and his mech boys have reportedly gained some control over its movement through the warp. This gives Nazdreg unprecedented mobility, allowing him to appear anywhere in the galaxy with his substantial forces. What distinguishes Nazdreg is his use of guile and intelligence. He speaks fluent Low Gothic and seems to understand human psychology better than most orcs. He uses both punishment and rewards to motivate his followers, an approach uncommon among greenskin leaders who typically rely solely on fear and respect. He has outwitted Imperial commanders multiple times, escaping traps and turning ambushes to his advantage. Even Kaz-Kul respects Nazdreg's abilities, which says much about the cunning warboss's reputation. Nazdreg's equipment reflects his sophistication. He wears custom mega armor and wields a weapon called the Custom Blaster X, which he fires with accuracy that would be remarkable for any orc. His personal guard consists of veteran nobs who have been with him for decades, unusual loyalty in the typically fractious world of orc politics. Tusker Daemon Killer earned his name and his legend through sheer audacity. Tusker led his forces into the Eye of Terror itself, that hell dimension where chaos reigns supreme. Rather than being corrupted or destroyed, Tusker fought demon hordes across multiple chaos-controlled worlds. His crusade seemed unstoppable until he landed on a flesh planet ruled by a demon prince of Khorne known as the Blood Prince. The battle that followed was apocalyptic. Tusker's forces fought with characteristic orc enthusiasm against demonic opponents that could not truly die. Both sides suffered enormous casualties. The Blood Prince personally faced Tusker, and though the warboss managed to grievously wound the demon prince before dying, he and all his boys were eventually slain. But the story does not end there. Khorne, the blood god, was so pleased by the violence and fury of Tusker's final battle that he granted the orcs a twisted immortality. Every day, Tusker and his boys are reborn. Every day, they fight the Blood Prince's forces in an endless battle. Every night they die and are resurrected the next dawn to fight again.
From an orc perspective, this is not damnation, but paradise, eternal combat without end. Clawjaw presents a darker aspect of orc capability. Once a primitive tribal leader named Cog, he underwent a transformation after eating a mutated squig. When he awoke, he had grown massively in size and wore crude armor that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. His personality had changed as well, becoming more cunning and more ruthless. Clawjaw proceeded to unite all the tribes on his world through brutal conquest, then launched a crusade that claimed multiple systems. What makes Clawjaw particularly interesting is the mystery surrounding his transformation. Did the squig contain some ancient genetic remnant that awakened Krork genes? Was he touched by Gork and Mork? The answer remains unknown, but the result was clear. An orc who combined primitive brutality with strategic intelligence in a way that made him exceptionally dangerous until Imperial forces finally brought him down. These warbosses represent different facets of orc potential. Kaz-Kul shows strategic vision and organizational ability. The beast demonstrated near-Krork levels of intelligence and capability. Urlak proved that orcs could build genuine empires. Nazdreg exhibits cunning and technological mastery. Tusker embodied pure orc enthusiasm for combat taken to its logical extreme. Each represents a path that orcs might follow, a potential they might realize. What unites all these leaders is their size. Every one of them grew to massive proportions through countless victories, their bodies responding to success with proportional expansion. This physical manifestation of combat prowess creates a visual hierarchy that all orcs understand instinctively. The biggest orc is the best orc, and these legends achieved sizes that proclaimed their superiority to all observers. But size alone does not explain their success. Each of these war bosses possessed something more: the ability to inspire other orcs to follow them. Kaz-Kul's visions of galactic conquest, the beast's promise of revenge against humanity, Urlak's establishment of a genuine empire, Nazdreg's string of clever victories, Tusker's willingness to charge into literal hell for a good fight. These narratives attracted followers, and with followers came power, and with power came more followers in a cycle that could grow until entire sectors trembled. The existence of such exceptional orcs represents both a limitation and a potential for the species. It is a limitation because most orcs never achieve such heights, remaining ordinary warriors who live, fight, and die without ever rising to leadership.
But it is a potential because it proves that the capacity for greatness exists within the species, waiting for the right combination of circumstances to manifest. Every orc carries genes inherited from the Krork. Every orc contains the potential, however slight, to grow into something that approaches those ancient warriors in capability. Most will die long before realizing a fraction of that potential, but a few, through combination of luck, ability, and sheer stubborn persistence, will grow large enough and win enough victories to become leaders. And of those leaders, a tiny handful will achieve legendary status, their names remembered across the galaxy as warnings and inspiration in equal measure. The Imperium studies these exceptional orcs carefully. Understanding what made Ghazghkull dangerous helps predict how he might act in the future. Analyzing the beast's strategies informs preparation for potential future prime orcs. Learning from past mistakes in confronting these leaders might save countless lives when the next legendary war boss inevitably arises. Because that is the grim certainty. There will always be another exceptional orc. The species is too numerous, too widespread, too enthusiastic about fighting for legendary leaders not to emerge periodically. The only questions are when and where, not if. Somewhere in the galaxy right now, an ordinary orc is winning his first real victory. He grows a little larger. He attracts his first followers. He wins his second victory and his third, and his reputation begins to spread. Perhaps he will remain merely a minor war boss, his career ending in some forgotten skirmish. Or perhaps he will be the next Ghazghkull, the next beast, the next name that entire sectors will learn to fear. This is the nature of orc leadership. It is not inherited or appointed. It is earned through violence and demonstrated through size. It creates a system where the most capable warriors naturally rise to positions of authority, while those who fail are quickly replaced. It is crude, brutal, and entirely effective at ensuring that orc armies are led by warriors who have proven their ability to win. The masters of orc warfare are not born. They are forged in battle, growing with each victory until they tower over their fellows. They are not educated or trained. They learn by doing, their genetic legacy providing instinctive understanding of combat and leadership. They are not elected or anointed. They simply are, their existence self-evident to any orc who sees them. This is how the species has operated for millions of years, and it shows no sign of changing. In the end, these legendary war bosses matter because they demonstrate what orcs are capable of at their best. They show that the species is not limited to mindless brutality, but can produce leaders of genuine strategic capability when circumstances align correctly. They prove that the threat orcs pose is not merely numerical but qualitative, that exceptional individuals can arise who match or exceed the capabilities of the best commanders other species can field. The Imperium fears these exceptional orcs more than it fears the ordinary millions who charge across battlefields. The ordinary millions can be defeated through superior strategy and firepower, but the exceptional ones, the Ghazghkulls and the beasts, those require desperate measures and tremendous sacrifice to overcome. Those are the orcs who come closest to fulfilling the potential engineered into the species millions of years ago. Those are the ones who remind the galaxy why the orcs have endured so long, and why they will continue to endure no matter how many times they are defeated. Measuring the might. Orcs versus other factions. The true measure of orc strength becomes clear when comparing them directly against the other major factions that struggle for dominance in the 41st millennium. Each comparison reveals different aspects of orc capabilities and helps explain why they remain such a persistent threat despite their apparent primitiveness. Against the Space Marines, humanity's finest warriors clad in ceramite and armed with the best weapons the Imperium can produce, orcs hold their own through sheer numbers and physical capability. An individual Space Marine is a superior warrior to an individual orc in most circumstances. The Marine possesses better training, better equipment, and often better tactical awareness.
but orcs are rarely encountered individually. A typical orc boy stands roughly the same height as a space marine and possesses comparable strength. The marine's advantages come from his armor, his weapons, and his training rather than from superior physical prowess. In close combat, an orc with a chupa and a space marine with a chainsword are more evenly matched than many would expect. The orc's crude weapon, reinforced by the gestalt field and swung with tremendous strength, can cleave through ceramite armor. The space marine's superior skill gives him an edge, but it is not an overwhelming one. The calculus changes when considering numbers. Space marines typically operate in small numbers, squads of 10 or companies of 100. Orcs operate in mobs of dozens or hundreds. A single tactical squad facing 10 orcs will likely prevail. That same squad facing 50 orcs is in serious trouble. Facing 200 orcs, even space marines must consider retreat. The orcs' numerical superiority allows them to absorb casualties that would cripple a marine force while still maintaining offensive capability. This explains why orc invasions are often contained by space marine chapters, but rarely eliminated by them. The marines can win individual battles, but the sheer number of orcs means that total victory requires sustained effort over months or years. Few chapters can dedicate their full strength to a single campaign for such extended periods, which allows orc populations to recover and rebuild between major engagements. Against the Imperial Guard, the Imperium's main military force consisting of countless billions of soldiers armed with laser guns and supported by tanks and artillery, orcs present a different set of challenges. Imperial Guard tactics rely on disciplined firepower, combined arms, and defensive positions. These approaches work well against many enemies, but struggle against orcs for several reasons. First, orcs are resilient enough to survive the kind of massed lasgun fire that would decimate most infantry. Their thick skin, redundant physiology, and general toughness mean that killing an orc often requires more firepower than killing an equivalent human soldier. A single lasgun shot might not be enough. Even multiple shots might not drop a determined orc before he reaches close combat. Second, orcs are not intimidated by casualties in the way that human soldiers are. Imperial Guard units that suffer 30% casualties begin to lose cohesion. Units that lose 50% break and run. Orcs simply keep coming until physically unable to continue. This fundamental psychological difference means that Imperial Guard tactics designed to break enemy morale through attrition fail against greenskin attackers. Third, if orcs reach close combat with Imperial Guard positions, the results are typically catastrophic for the humans. A single orc with a chupa can kill multiple guardsmen before being brought down. A mob of orcs hitting a guard position will likely overrun it regardless of how well the defenses are prepared. This forces the guard into a defensive strategy of maintaining distance and relying on firepower, which works until it doesn't. The Imperial Guard can defeat orc invasions, but it requires enormous expenditures of troops and material. Entire regiments might be sacrificed to hold a single position. Millions of soldiers might be committed to a campaign that lasts years. The Guard wins through sheer scale rather than tactical superiority, burying orc forces under avalanches of bodies and last fire until the greenskins are finally eliminated. Against the Tyranids, the horrifying biological swarms that devour entire worlds, orcs represent an interesting case study. Both species reproduce rapidly, both generate overwhelming numbers, and both excel at close quarters combat. When orc and Tyranid forces clash, the results are apocalyptic. The Tyranids possess advantages in coordination and adaptability. Their hive mind allows perfect tactical coordination. Their rapid evolution means they can adapt to counter specific orc capabilities within generations. Their biological weapons are often more sophisticated than orc equivalents, but orcs counter this with their own advantages. Orcs cannot be consumed and converted into biomass the way other species can. Their spore-based reproduction means that Tyranids who consume Ork corpses do not gain genetic material useful for creating new Tyranids. The fungal components of Ork physiology actually complicate Tyranid digestion, making Orks less valuable as food sources than other species. This reduces one of the Tyranids' key strategic advantages. More importantly, Orks love fighting Tyranids. The endless swarms provide exactly the kind of sustained combat that Orks find most enjoyable. Rather than being demoralized by facing overwhelming numbers, Orks are energized by it. The scale of Tyranid invasions means there is always another fight, always more enemies to kill, always something to test yourself against. For Orks, a Tyranid invasion is less an existential threat and more an opportunity for extended entertainment. The result is that Tyranid invasions of Ork-held worlds often bog down into grinding wars of attrition that can last for years. Neither side yields ground easily. Neither side suffers from morale problems. Both sides continue feeding more warriors into the meat grinder until one is finally exhausted. Sometimes the Tyranids win through superior numbers and adaptability. Sometimes the Orks win because the constant combat makes them grow larger and stronger. In either case, the conflict consumes resources on a scale that beggars imagination. Against chaos forces, whether traitor space marines or demonic entities, Orks demonstrate a peculiar resistance. The lack of direct warp connection in Orks' souls makes them difficult to corrupt. Chaos cannot offer them anything they do not already have. Power. They have strength and grow stronger with each fight. Pleasure. They find joy in combat. Knowledge. They care nothing for understanding beyond what helps them fight. Change. Every day brings new battles and new challenges. Demons find Orks frustrating opponents. The Greenskins show no fear when facing demonic entities that terrify other species. They do not respect the supernatural power of chaos. To an Ork, a bloodthirster is just another big enemy to fight, and fighting big enemies is fun. This lack of appropriate fear denies chaos one of its primary weapons. Chaos Space Marines possess the skill and equipment to counter individual Orks effectively, but they typically operate in even smaller numbers than loyal Marines. A warband of Chaos Marines might be 100 strong. An Ork army is often tens of thousands. The mathematics favor the Greenskins despite their opponent's individual superiority. The Gestalt field also provides some protection against warp-based attacks. The collective psychic presence of large Ork forces creates a buffer that makes it harder for chaos sorcery to affect individual Orks. They cannot be easily mind-controlled or possessed when surrounded by the psychic noise generated by thousands of their fellows. Against the Tau, the youngest major faction and the only one still clinging to optimism and hope for the future, Orks represent everything they find horrifying. The Tau rely on technology, careful planning, and combined arms tactics. They prefer to fight at range, using superior firepower to eliminate enemies before close combat occurs. These approaches work well against many foes, but struggle against Orks. Tau weapons are excellent at killing from a distance. Their pulse rifles and railguns can drop Ork warriors effectively. But Tau technology does not provide the same overwhelming superiority against Orks that it does against more primitive species. Ork toughness means they often survive hits that would kill others. Ork numbers mean that even effective Tau fire discipline cannot stop a determined charge. Ork speed, particularly speed freaks in vehicles, can close distance faster than Tau forces expect. If Orks reach close combat with Tau forces, the result is typically devastating for the blue-skinned Xenos. Tau are not built for melee combat. Their combat doctrine assumes they will prevent enemies from reaching close quarters through superior firepower. Orks simply accept the casualties from Tau shooting, charge forward, and proceed to butcher Tau warriors in close combat, where the Greenskins' strength and crude weapons provide overwhelming advantages. The Tau have learned through painful experience
that fighting orcs requires different tactics than fighting other enemies. They rely more heavily on their auxiliary races, who are better suited for close combat. They maintain more conservative defensive positions with multiple fallback lines. They use their superior mobility to refuse engagement on orc terms. But these adjustments show that the Tau recognize orcs as a serious threat, despite the greenskins' apparent technological primitiveness. Against the Eldar, ancient and sophisticated beings who manipulate events through foresight and surgical precision, orcs represent the antithesis of everything they value. The Eldar rely on quality over quantity, precision over brute force, finesse over raw power. Individual Eldar warriors are highly skilled and equipped with technology that seems like magic to other species. But the Eldar are few, their numbers dwindling, every loss irreplaceable. Orcs counter Eldar advantages through sheer, overwhelming presence. An Eldar ambush might kill dozens of orcs, but there are always more. An Eldar force might conduct a flawless tactical withdrawal, but orc forces pursue relentlessly. Eldar technology might be superior, but orc numbers and resilience allow them to absorb losses that would break any Eldar force. The Eldar often manipulate events to redirect orc forces away from their craft worlds and toward other targets. They seed false information, create apparent weaknesses in enemy defenses, and generally arrange circumstances to ensure that when the orcs go looking for a fight, they find it somewhere other than Eldar territory. This approach works, but demonstrates that even the sophisticated Eldar recognize they cannot simply defeat orc forces through direct combat. The pattern across all these matchups reveals consistent themes. Orcs compensate for any individual disadvantages through numbers, resilience, and enthusiasm. They cannot be broken through psychological means because they view warfare as entertainment. They cannot be starved out because they produce their own food through photosynthesis and fungus cultivation. They cannot be corrupted or subverted because they lack the psychological complexity that makes other species vulnerable to such approaches. More than any specific comparison, what makes orcs formidable is their universality. They have no particular weakness that can be consistently exploited. They are strong enough to fight space marines, numerous enough to overwhelm Imperial Guard, resilient enough to survive against tyrannids, incorruptible enough to resist chaos, simple enough to frustrate Eldar sophistication, aggressive enough to force Tau into uncomfortable tactical positions. This jack-of-all-trades capability means that no single approach reliably defeats orc forces. You must be prepared for close combat because they will try to force it. You must maintain firepower superiority because they will try to overwhelm you with numbers. You must protect your logistics because they will loot everything they can find. You must maintain morale because seeing them just keep coming despite casualties can break even veteran units. The Orcs' greatest advantage over every other faction is that they genuinely enjoy warfare. For Space Marines, battle is a grim duty. For Imperial Guard, it is survival. For Tyranids, it is feeding. For Chaos, it is offering to dark gods. For Eldar, it is necessity. For Tau, it is regrettable but required. Only for Orcs is warfare its own reward, pursued with enthusiasm and joy. This fundamental difference means Orcs never tire of fighting. They never burn out. They never question whether the struggle is worth it. They simply charge forward with bellowing laughter, eager for the next battle, the next enemy, the next chance to test themselves in violence. That enthusiasm, that absolute love of combat, makes them perpetually dangerous regardless of tactical circumstances or strategic situation. When measuring Orc strength against other factions, the conclusion is clear. They can hold their own against any force in the galaxy. They might not always win, but they never truly lose either, because even in defeat, they ensure that their spores will generate future generations to continue the fight. In this sense, Orcs cannot be defeated, only contained. And even containment requires sustained effort.
that few factions can maintain indefinitely. The Orks are not the strongest faction. They are not the most technologically advanced. They are not the most numerous, though they come close. They are not the most skilled, but they are strong enough, advanced enough, numerous enough, and skilled enough to remain competitive with everyone else. And that universal competence, combined with their joy in combat and their spore-based persistence, makes them one of the most successful species in the entire galaxy. The eternal threat. Why Orks can never be defeated. Understanding why Orks are strong is one thing. Understanding why that strength is eternal, why Orks represent a threat that can never truly be eliminated, requires examining the mechanisms that make them so persistent. This is not merely a matter of their combat capabilities, though those are significant. It is about biological, ecological, and psychological factors that ensure Orks will remain a galactic presence as long as there is a galaxy to inhabit. The spore-based reproduction discussed earlier is the foundation of Ork persistence. Every Ork continuously releases spores throughout his life, with massive releases at the moment of death. These spores are microscopic, carried by wind, water, and even in the boots of unwary soldiers. A single spore can survive in harsh conditions for years or even decades, waiting for circumstances favorable to growth. When an Imperial Guard regiment defeats an Ork invasion and returns home victoriously, they carry spores with them on their equipment, their vehicles, their very bodies. When Orks raid a shipping lane and are driven off, their spores drift through the void until captured by a planet's gravity. When Orks are defeated and their bodies burned, spores are still released that spread across the battlefield before the flames can reach them. This means that Ork presence on a world is almost impossible to eliminate completely once established. You can kill every visible Ork, burn their bodies, scour their settlements, and still miss dormant spores buried in the soil or lodged in cracks in buildings. Those spores will eventually germinate, starting the cycle anew. Decades after defeating an Ork invasion, a world might find itself facing feral Orks emerging from wilderness areas, descendants of spores left behind by the original invaders. The only reliable way to eliminate Orks from a world is exterminatus, the complete destruction of all life on the planet. Short of that, Ork eradication requires decades of sustained effort, regular sweeps of wilderness areas, and constant vigilance for signs of new growth. Few worlds can afford to dedicate resources to such thorough cleansing when there are always new threats demanding attention. The result is that most worlds that have ever hosted Ork invasions still harbor dormant spore populations waiting to grow. The Orkoid ecosystem is self-sustaining in ways that make them independent of external logistics. Snotlings cultivate fungi that feed Gretchen and Orks. Squigs provide additional food sources, materials, and even weapons. The fungi grow quickly, sometimes reaching maturity in days given favorable conditions. This means that even a small Ork population can become self-sufficient with minimal resources. Compare this to human armies that require supply lines for food, ammunition, fuel, and spare parts. Disrupt those supply lines and the army weakens. Orks produce their own food through photosynthesis and fungus cultivation. They manufacture their own ammunition from local materials. Their vehicles run on fuel, they refine themselves. Their mech boys repair or rebuild equipment using scavenged components. An Ork army can campaign indefinitely as long as they have access to light and some basic materials. This self-sufficiency makes it nearly impossible to defeat Orks through economic warfare or siege. Blockading an Ork-held world does not starve them out. It merely annoys them because they cannot leave to find more fights. Denying them resources does not cripple their military capability because they were never dependent on external resources to begin with. The only way to defeat Orks is direct military action, and as discussed, that action must be sustained and thorough to prevent spores from ensuring future resurgence. The Ork psychology contributes to their persistence as well.
They do not become demoralized by repeated defeats because they do not view defeat the way other species do. An orc who loses a battle and survives thinks, "That was a good fight, let's have another one," rather than, "We lost, this is hopeless." The concept of learned helplessness, where repeated failure leads to giving up, does not exist in orc psychology. This means orcs will continue fighting even in circumstances where any other species would surrender or retreat. They do not calculate odds of success. They do not worry about casualty rates. They simply charge forward because charging forward is what they do, and they trust that somehow things will work out. This absolute confidence, backed by the Gestalt field, often becomes self-fulfilling as reality bends to accommodate their certainty. The split nature of orc society paradoxically contributes to their survival. In a unified state, the orcs would be exponentially more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. Defeat the central leadership, and the entire empire might collapse. Destroy the homeworld, and the species might never recover. But orcs are divided into countless clans, tribes, and warbands spread across the galaxy. Each group operates independently, pursuing its own goals. This fragmentation means there is no central point of failure. You cannot defeat the orcs because there is no single orc entity to defeat. You can defeat a particular warband, crush a specific invasion, kill a certain war boss. But while you are doing so, thousands of other orc groups continue their own campaigns elsewhere in the galaxy. The species as a whole cannot be eliminated through strategic strikes or decisive victories because there is no strategy that encompasses all orcs. Paradoxically, the same division that prevents orcs from achieving total galactic conquest also ensures their eternal persistence. They are too successful at being orcs, too enthusiastic about fighting anyone, including each other, too prone to internal conflict to ever truly unify. But this constant internal warring keeps them sharp, tests new leaders, and prevents any single defeat from being terminal to the species. The joy orcs find in combat is perhaps their greatest strength from a species survival perspective. Most intelligent species view warfare as a necessary evil, something to be endured or minimized. Orcs view it as the point of existence. This means they actively seek out combat rather than avoiding it, ensuring they remain militarily sharp rather than soft. Other species train for war. Orcs live for war. The difference is significant. Training can only approximate the chaos and terror of actual combat. Even the best training scenarios cannot fully prepare warriors for the reality of battle. But orcs are always fighting, if not against external enemies, then against each other. Every orc accumulates real combat experience throughout his life. By the time an orc is old enough to be a knob, he has survived more actual battles than many professional soldiers experience in entire careers. This constant combat experience, combined with the growth mechanism where successful warriors literally become larger and stronger, creates a ruthlessly effective selection process. Weak orcs die quickly. Strong orcs survive and grow stronger. Only the most capable reach positions of leadership. The system is brutal, but effective at ensuring that orc armies are led by proven warriors who have demonstrated their ability through countless victories. The genetic legacy of the Krork remains encoded in every orc's DNA, waiting for the right circumstances to express itself. While modern orcs are degraded from their ancestors, the potential for greatness remains. Prime orcs like the beast can arise, beings who approach or equal Krork capabilities. The mechanisms for this regression are not fully understood, but the fact that it can happen means the orc threat can escalate unexpectedly. Imagine the Imperium's horror if another War of the Beast were to occur. Imagine if multiple prime orcs were to arise simultaneously, each organizing their own massive armies, each possessing the intelligence and capability of the original beast. The nightmare scenario is that somewhere, through some combination of circumstances,
Orks begin reverting en masse to their Krork origins. The result would be an enemy force that combines overwhelming numbers with superior technology and intelligence that matches or exceeds the best human commanders. This potential lies dormant in the Ork genome. It might never manifest again. But the fact that it could means the Ork threat must always be taken seriously. You are not fighting a species that has reached its ceiling. You are fighting a species whose ceiling is as high as the Krork, warrior engineers who fought in the war in heaven alongside the old ones themselves. The Orks might never reach those heights again, but the possibility ensures that complacency is never warranted. The sheer number of Orks makes total elimination a practical impossibility. They exist in the billions or trillions spread across the entire galaxy. They infest countless worlds, operate from numberless bases, and appear in regions thought long secured. To kill every Ork would require killing every Ork simultaneously, because as long as some survive, they will reproduce through spores and rebuild their numbers. The Imperium could dedicate its entire military to Ork eradication, abandoning all other concerns, and it still would not succeed. While Imperial forces scoured one sector, Orks in 10 others would grow stronger. While they fought on 1,000 worlds, Orks on 10,000 others would launch new invasions. The scale of the problem exceeds any possible solution short of galaxy-wide exterminatus, which would defeat the purpose by destroying everything worth saving. This numerical superiority means Orks can absorb losses that would cripple any other faction. A Space Marine chapter that loses a quarter of its strength requires decades to rebuild. An Ork warband that loses a quarter of its strength recruits more Orks from nearby tribes and is back to full strength within weeks. The disparity in recovery times means that even when Orks lose battles, they often win the larger war of attrition simply by outlasting their enemy's ability to sustain combat operations. The Orks' lack of a formal civilization in the conventional sense also contributes to their persistence. They build settlements and fortifications, but these are temporary and pragmatic rather than permanent institutions. An Ork city exists to support war efforts, not as an end in itself. If that city is destroyed, the Orks shrug and build another one somewhere else. This means you cannot defeat Orks by destroying their infrastructure the way you might cripple another species. Bomb their factories, and they build new ones from scrap. Destroy their cities, and they move to new locations. Eliminate their leadership, and new leaders emerge through combat. There are no vital cultural or industrial centers whose destruction would break Ork society, because Ork society is not dependent on such centers. The adaptability of Ork technology also ensures their persistence. Because mech boys work from instinct rather than rigid templates, they can adapt their designs to whatever materials are available. An Ork warband teleported to a primitive world would build weapons from local materials within days. An Ork warband trapped in a space hulk would manufacture equipment from salvaged starship components. This flexibility means Orks can thrive in almost any environment and recover from almost any material setback. The final factor in Ork persistence is that they serve a vital ecological role in the galaxy, as grotesque as that sounds. They keep other species sharp through constant pressure. They eliminate weak civilizations while strong ones survive by learning to counter greenskin tactics. They provide a common enemy that forces cooperation between groups who might otherwise fight each other. In a twisted way, the eternal Ork threat helps maintain the balance of power by preventing any one faction from becoming too dominant. The Imperium has learned to accept Ork presence as a fact of life rather than a problem to be solved. Imperial strategy focuses on containment rather than elimination, on managing Ork populations rather than eradicating them. This is not defeatism, but pragmatism. Fighting Orks is something the Imperium will be doing forever, so they structure their military doctrine around that reality. This acceptance of Orks as a permanent threat shapes everything from fortress world placement
to Space Marine chapter dispositions, to Imperial Guard training. The Imperium has adapted to a galaxy where greenskins are omnipresent, where any world might face an Ork invasion, where eternal vigilance is required, not because victory is possible, but because defeat is not acceptable. The Orks will never be defeated because they cannot be defeated, not by any means short of destroying the galaxy itself. Their biology ensures persistence through spore reproduction. Their psychology ensures motivation through joy in combat. Their fragmentation ensures resilience through lack of central vulnerability. Their numbers ensure recovery through sheer scale. Their adaptability ensures survival through flexibility. They are the eternal threat, the permanent enemy, the species that will endure as long as there is anything to fight against. They were created to fight forever, and in that task at least, the Old One's design has succeeded perfectly. The Orks will be here tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until the very end of time itself. They are inevitable, inexhaustible, and impossible to eliminate. They are, quite simply, eternal. The culture of combat, Ork society. To understand Ork strength fully, one must examine not just their biology or their military capabilities, but their culture, the social structures that govern their interactions and shape their behavior. Ork society, if it can be called that, is organized around one principle: might makes right. But within this brutal simplicity lies surprising complexity and variety. The foundation of Ork culture is the clan system. Orks naturally gravitate toward clans based on shared preferences and fighting styles. These are not formal organizations with membership rosters or initiation ceremonies. Rather, an Ork feels drawn to a particular clan because its approach to warfare resonates with his own instincts. The Gestalt field may play a role in this, with Orks unconsciously sensing which clan fits their nature. The Goths are the most numerous clan, focused purely on close combat and brute force. They see shooters as tools you use while running toward the enemy, and the real fight begins when blades cross. Goths paint their equipment black and favor brutal simplicity in tactics and equipment. They produce many of the most successful war bosses because their focus on melee combat forces them to prove themselves in the most dangerous situations. The Bad Moons are distinguished by their wealth, their teeth growing faster than other Orks, and thus giving them more currency. They field better equipment, more shooters, and flashier gear. Bad Moons paint their equipment yellow and believe that bigger explosions are better explosions. They are ostentatious in their wealth display, wearing jewelry made of teeth and gold looted from enemies. Other Orks view them with mixture of envy and contempt. Wealthy, but perhaps not as hard as true warriors. The Blood Axes are the most tactically flexible Orks, willing to use strategies other clans consider cowardly or un-Orky. They retreat when necessary, use cover and concealment, and sometimes coordinate with other units in ways that approach conventional military doctrine. Blood Axes have extensive contact with humans through mercenary work and trading, picking up both vocabulary and tactics from their interactions. Other Orks view them with suspicion, but their methods work. The Evil Sons are speed fanatics who believe red makes things go faster and thus paint everything red. They favor bikes, vehicles, and anything that moves quickly. Evil Sons live for the thrill of velocity, the rush of wind against green skin, the excitement of charging into battle at maximum speed. They provide much of the mechanized component of Ork armies, racing ahead to hit enemy flanks and create chaos. The Death Skulls are looters supreme, painting their equipment blue because they believe blue is lucky. They scavenge everything and have no shame about taking equipment from other Orks, fallen enemies, or even allies who are not watching carefully enough. Death Skulls test their looted gear extensively, and if it survives testing, they consider it proven and reliable. Their willingness to use any equipment regardless of origin makes them adaptable and unpredictable. The Snakebites are the most traditional Orks, rejecting technology in favor of more primitive fighting styles. They hunt large beasts, ride boars or squiggoth, and generally live in ways that resemble their feral ancestors. Other orcs consider them backward, but snakebites do not care. They know that fighting big monsters makes them tough, and toughness matters more than fancy equipment. Within each clan, and cutting across clan lines, are the odd boys, specialists who fulfill specific roles in orc society. The mech boys have already been discussed extensively, their genetic knowledge allowing them to build and repair equipment. But there are other specialist castes, each fulfilling roles necessary for orc armies to function. Pain boys serve as doctors, though their approach to medicine would horrify any properly trained physician. They perform surgery with crude tools and little concern for patient comfort. They replace damaged body parts with mechanical or animal components as whim dictates. They experiment on their patients, testing new procedures and techniques with cavalier disregard for safety. Yet somehow their methods work, keeping orcs fighting who would otherwise be crippled or dead. Weird boys have been discussed as psychic conduits, but they also play a role in orc spirituality. Some orcs view them as touched by Gork and Mork, blessed or cursed with a connection to the divine. Weird boys sometimes receive visions that they interpret as messages from the gods, proclamations that spur orcs toward particular actions. Whether these visions are genuine divine communication or simply psychic impressions from the Gestalt field remains unclear, but many orcs believe in them. Runthurds manage the Gretchen, the smaller orcoids who do much of the grunt work in orc society. Runthurds carry whips and are not afraid to use them, keeping the Gretchen in line through fear and violence. They also breed and train squigs, the omnivorous beasts that orcs use for food, transport, and weapons. A skilled Runthurd is valuable to any orc force, ensuring smooth logistics and support functions. Big mechs are the most skilled mech boys, those whose genetic knowledge has developed to its fullest expression. They can build devices that lesser mechs can only dream of, exotic weapons and complex vehicles that require deep understanding of technology. Big mechs often serve as advisors to war bosses, providing technical expertise to complement the war boss's combat prowess. The orc religion, if it can be called that, centers on two gods, Gork and Mork. Gork is the god of cunning brutality. Mork is the god of brutal cunning. The difference between the two is subtle, with Gork representing the act of hitting someone hard when they are looking, while Mork represents hitting someone hard when they are not looking. Orcs sometimes argue about which god is which, unable to remember if Gork is the cunning one or the brutal one, but these arguments rarely lead to serious disputes. The orc concept of an afterlife involves the Great Green, a place where all orc souls go to be reborn if they please the gods. Evidence suggests this might be more than mythology. Some orcs demonstrate knowledge of past lives or speak of fighting in earlier incarnations. The Gretchen, known as Makari, has apparently been reborn multiple times, his soul recycling through new bodies. Whether this represents genuine reincarnation or something else remains unclear. Hierarchy in orc society is determined by size and combat success. The biggest orc is the boss because he has proven through countless victories that he deserves to be. This creates a clear, visible power structure that all orcs understand instinctively. When a new orc joins a mob, he immediately knows who is in charge by looking for the biggest green skin present. This size-based hierarchy is maintained through constant testing. Nobs, the larger orcs who lead smaller groups, must occasionally fight to prove they still deserve their positions. A nob who becomes weak or injured might find himself challenged by ambitious subordinates. The system ensures that leadership remains with the most capable warriors, while also providing opportunity for rising talents to prove themselves. War bosses rule through combination of size, combat prowess, and force of personality. They do not issue complex orders or develop sophisticated strategies. Instead, they point at an enemy and say, "Go kill that," and their followers comply because that is what you do when the biggest orc tells you to do something. Simple, but effective. Disputes between orcs are settled through violence, as might be expected. Two orcs arguing about anything might end up settling the matter with their fists. These brawls are rarely fatal, more like tests of strength than serious combat. Once one orc establishes dominance, the dispute is settled, at least until circumstances change enough to warrant reopening the question. This casual violence serves multiple functions in orc society. It resolves disputes quickly without need for formal adjudication. It keeps orcs sharp through constant practice. It entertains those who watch. And it reinforces the basic principle that might makes right, that the strongest orc wins the argument regardless of the logical merits of either position. Orc language is crude but functional, with many loanwords adopted from species they encounter. Orcs who interact frequently with humans pick up Gothic vocabulary, while those who fight Eldar might incorporate their words. The language adapts constantly, with new terms appearing and old ones falling out of use as needed. Grammar is loose, pronunciation varies wildly, and spelling is more suggestion than rule. Despite this apparent crudeness, Orc language expresses what orcs need to express. They have dozens of words for different types of fighting and various implements of violence. They can describe equipment with precision adequate for mechboy work. They can communicate tactical concepts sufficiently for battlefield coordination. The language works because it evolved to serve orc purposes, and orc purposes revolve around warfare. Orc art, when it exists, tends toward the practical. They decorate weapons and vehicles with kills marks, paint schemes and trophies from defeated enemies. They carve crude images into their equipment. Some orcs paint elaborate designs on their armor, though whether this constitutes art or simply identification marking is debatable. The closest thing to pure art in orc culture might be the elaborate constructions their mechboys create, machines that combine function with aggressive aesthetics. Music exists in orc culture primarily in the form of war chants and rhythmic bellowing. Orcs do not have instruments in the conventional sense, though some bang on armor or scrap metal to create percussive accompaniment to their shouting. The purpose is not entertainment, but psychological preparation for combat, working themselves into a frenzy suitable for charging into battle. Orc economy runs on teeth, specifically the teeth that orcs shed and regrow throughout their lives. These serve as currency, with more impressive teeth being worth more. This creates a biological currency that cannot be counterfeited and that naturally inflates as orcs engage in combat and lose teeth. The system works because all orcs understand it instinctively and because teeth have inherent value as proof of violence survived. Trade between orcs consists mostly of bartering equipment, with mechboys building weapons and vehicles in exchange for teeth they can use to purchase materials. The Bad Moons, with their fast-growing teeth, dominate commerce through their abundant currency. Other orcs must either spend their teeth wisely or take them from others through violence. Family structures do not exist in orc society as other species understand them. Orcs emerge from the ground without parents. They form bonds of brotherhood with other orcs they fight alongside, but these are based on shared experience rather than blood relationship. The concept of parenthood is foreign to greenskin psychology. They reproduce through spores, and the cycle continues without any need for traditional family arrangements. This absence of family ties contributes to orc resilience. They do not mourn lost comrades the way other species mourn family members. An orc who falls in battle is gone, and his fellows move on immediately without dwelling on the loss. This emotional detachment allows orcs to function in conditions that would break the morale of species who form stronger emotional bonds. Education does not exist in formal sense. Young orcs learn by watching older orcs and through trial and error. Genetic knowledge provides baseline capabilities, but specific skills must be practiced. An orc who wants to become better at fighting fights more and learns from his mistakes. An orc who wants to build better weapons experiments with different designs until he finds what works. The system is brutal but effective.
Ork culture, crude as it appears, functions perfectly for its purpose, supporting endless warfare. The clan system provides variety and specialization while maintaining unity when facing external threats. The size-based hierarchy ensures competent leadership while allowing new talent to rise. The specialist odd boys fulfill necessary support roles. The simple economy and lack of family structures reduce complexity and allow focus on combat. This is not a culture in the human sense, with art and philosophy and literature. It is a warrior culture stripped to its essence, containing only those elements necessary for orcs to fight, grow, and reproduce. Everything else has been eliminated as unnecessary baggage. The result is a society that functions with remarkable efficiency despite its apparent chaos. Other species view orc culture with mixture of contempt and incomprehension. They see the crude language, the brutal hierarchy, the constant violence, and conclude that orcs are barely civilized. But this judgment misses the point. Orc culture is not trying to be human culture or Eldar culture or Tau culture. It is perfectly adapted for orcs, providing everything they need while discarding everything they do not. In a galaxy of endless war, perhaps the orcs have the right idea. Strip away the unnecessary complications. Focus on what matters. Fight, grow, reproduce, and repeat. It is not sophisticated, but sophistication was never the goal. The goal was to create a species that could fight forever, and by that measure, orc culture succeeds spectacularly. Conclusion: the green forever. We began this exploration asking how strong the orcs are in Warhammer 40,000. Having examined their biology, their technology, their tactics, their history, their leaders, and their culture, we can now provide an answer. Terrifyingly strong, and more importantly, eternally so. The orcs are not the most skilled warriors in the galaxy. Space Marines surpass them in individual combat ability. They are not the most technologically advanced. The Tau and the Necrons both field superior equipment. They are not even the most numerous, as the Tyranids might exceed their count. Yet the orcs succeed where more sophisticated species fail, because they are perfectly adapted for the galaxy they inhabit. Their strength comes from multiple sources working in synergy. The biological engineering of the Old Ones gave them bodies that can withstand tremendous damage and recover from injuries that would kill other species. Their hybrid animal-fungal nature allows them to photosynthesize and grow new populations from spores, making them self-sufficient and nearly impossible to eradicate. Their instinctive understanding of technology, encoded in their genes, allows them to build weapons and vehicles that function despite appearing crude. The Gestalt psychic field they generate collectively gives them capabilities that defy conventional physics. It makes their ramshackle technology work beyond its apparent limitations. It strengthens them when they gather in large numbers. It allows their weird boys to channel devastating psychic power. This field is both weapon and shield, offense and defense, all generated unconsciously by simply being orcs together. Their psychology is perhaps their greatest advantage. They feel joy in combat rather than fear or grim determination. They view warfare not as necessary evil, but as the point of existence. This enthusiasm makes them resilient to morale damage, immune to intimidation, and perpetually motivated. Where other species tire of endless war, orcs thrive on it. Their tactics are crude, but effective. Close with the enemy, overwhelm through numbers and ferocity, claim victory through violence. This simplicity is strength rather than weakness, because it plays to orc advantages while avoiding the need for complex logistics or sophisticated planning. Every orc understands the basic approach instinctively. Their history demonstrates both their potential and their danger. The War of the Beast showed what organized orcs under exceptional leadership can accomplish, bringing the Imperium closer to total defeat than anything since the Horus Heresy. The fact that such organization remains possible That prime orcs can arise who approach their Krork ancestors in capability means the threat can escalate unexpectedly. Their greatest leaders, from the Beast to Gazkul, to the countless other war bosses who have terrorized the galaxy, prove that orcs are not limited to mindless brutality. They can produce strategists and tacticians who match the best commanders other species field. These exceptional individuals, growing large through countless victories, demonstrate the heights to which orcs can aspire when circumstances align correctly. When measured against other factions, orcs hold their own through combination of advantages. They can fight space marines through numerical superiority and physical strength. They can overwhelm Imperial Guard through resilience and enthusiasm. They can outlast Tyranids because their spores cannot be consumed. They resist chaos through their simplicity and joy in what they do. They frustrate Eldar sophistication through crude directness. They force Tau into uncomfortable tactical positions through aggressive close combat. The eternal nature of the orc threat stems from factors that cannot be eliminated without destroying the galaxy itself. Spore-based reproduction ensures persistence. Self-sufficient ecosystem ensures independence. Fragmented society ensures resilience. Numbers ensure recovery. Adaptability ensures survival. Joy in combat ensures motivation. These factors combine to create a species that will endure as long as there is anything to fight against. Their culture, crude as it appears, functions perfectly for supporting endless warfare. The clan system provides variety within unity. The size-based hierarchy ensures competent leadership. The specialist oddboys fulfill necessary support roles. The simple economy reduces complexity. The absence of family structures prevents emotional vulnerabilities. Every aspect of orc society serves the purpose of enabling combat. So how strong are the orcs? They are strong enough to threaten any faction in the galaxy, strong enough to have survived for millions of years, strong enough to outnumber possibly every other intelligent species, strong enough to bring the Imperium of man to its knees multiple times throughout history, strong enough to adapt to any environment and recover from any setback, strong enough to persist despite the best efforts of the galaxy's other powers to eliminate them. But their strength is not merely a matter of capability, it is a matter of purpose. The orcs were created by the old ones to fight forever, and they fulfill that purpose with genuine enthusiasm. In a galaxy where there is only war, the orcs are the most perfectly adapted species because they alone truly love what they do. Other factions fight because they must. Orcs fight because they want to. This makes them simultaneously the most dangerous and the most persistent threat in the 41st millennium. You cannot break their morale because they are in high spirits. You cannot starve them out because they feed themselves. You cannot corrupt them because they lack the complexity that makes corruption possible. You cannot defeat them permanently because their spores ensure future resurgence. You cannot eliminate them entirely because they are too numerous and too widespread. The Imperium has learned to accept orc presence as permanent feature of the galaxy. Every world must prepare for possible orc invasion. Every sector maintains forces to respond to greenskin incursions. Every Space Marine chapter has fought orcs and will fight them again. This is not defeatism, but realism. The orcs are here to stay, and the best anyone can do is contain them rather than eliminate them. For students of Warhammer 40,000 lore, the orcs represent something unique. They are simultaneously comic relief and genuine threat, crude barbarians and sophisticated warriors, primitive in appearance and advanced in capability. This duality makes them fascinating to study and terrifying to face. They defy easy categorization because they combine contradictory elements into a whole that exceeds expectations. The orcs will be here tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until the very end of time itself. They will continue charging across battlefields with bellowing laughter and crude weapons. They will continue building ramshackle vehicles that somehow work.
They will continue gathering in ever larger numbers, drawn by the promise of good fights. They will continue producing exceptional leaders who organize massive invasions. They will continue surviving every attempt to eliminate them. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Orks are perhaps the ultimate expression of what that means. They are war incarnate, violence made manifest, combat given physical form. They do not merely participate in the endless conflict that defines the 41st millennium. They celebrate it, embrace it, live for it with enthusiasm that other species cannot match or comprehend. This is how strong the Orks are, strong enough to survive forever in a galaxy designed to kill them, strong enough to adapt to any challenge and overcome any obstacle, strong enough to threaten civilizations that span thousands of worlds, strong enough to bring joy to battles that break other warriors' spirits, strong enough to endure, to persist, to continue fighting long after every rational reason to stop. The green tide will never end. The war cry will never fade. The crude weapons will never cease their thunder. The Orks are eternal, and in their eternity lies strength beyond measure. They were created to fight forever, and in the grim darkness of the far future, they fulfill that purpose with enthusiasm that borders on the sublime. They are the Orks, and they are, quite simply, unstoppable. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the strength of the Orks in Warhammer 40,000, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss future explorations of the grim darkness of the far future. Share your thoughts in the comments below about which aspect of Ork strength you found most interesting or surprising. And if there are other factions or topics you would like me to cover in similar depth, let me know. Until next time, may your dice roll well and may the Emperor protect. Or, if you are feeling particularly green, may Gork and Mork guide your trooper to the biggest fight available.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.